The Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds when billionaire Juliet Carter called out the janitor mopping her stage. "You there," she said, pointing at the man in worn coveralls. "Care to demonstrate some Tai Chi with me just for fun?" The crowd of investors laughed. The janitor set down his mop. What happened next would shatter every assumption about power mastery and what true strength really means. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this tale travels. The September evening wrapped Manhattan in a golden embrace, painting the glass towers with honey-colored light that seemed to promise endless possibilities. On the rooftop of the Meridian building, 47 floors above the churning streets, Juliet Carter stood at the center of her carefully orchestrated world. At 38, she commanded attention with the kind of presence that made boardrooms fall silent and competitors second-guess their strategies. Her tailored white suit caught the breeze, and her movements held the fluid grace of someone who'd spent 2 decades mastering the ancient art of Tai Chi. "Ladies and gentlemen," Juliet's voice carried across the rooftop garden, reaching the 150 investors, journalists, and wellness industry titans who'd gathered for this exclusive unveiling. "Tonight we don't just launch a wellness empire. We launch a revolution in how humanity understands balance, power, and inner strength." Behind her massive LED screens displayed the logo of Harmony Dynamics, a sleek fusion of Eastern philosophy and Western ambition. The company promised to bring authentic Tai Chi training to corporate America with centers planned in 12 major cities. The first would open here in Manhattan next month, and the pre-sales had already topped $8 million. Mason Cole pushed his mop across the temporary stage, working around the edges of the spotlight that bathed Juliet in its warm glow. At 41, he moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible in plain sight. His coveralls bore the building's maintenance logo faded from countless washes. A few steps behind him, perched on a folding chair near the service entrance, his 9-year-old daughter Lila hunched over her homework, her backpack beside her feet. "Dad, I'm hungry," Lila whispered when Mason passed near her chair. "20 more minutes, sweetheart," Mason murmured back, his voice barely audible above the cocktail chatter. "Then we'll grab those dumplings you like from Chen's." Juliet continued her presentation, demonstrating a series of Tai Chi movements that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Her form was technically perfect. Each gesture measured, each transition smooth as silk. She'd trained with masters in Beijing, competed in international tournaments, written 3 best-selling books on the intersection of martial arts and business strategy. "The beauty of Tai Chi," she explained, completing a movement called parting the wild horse's mane, lies not in aggression but in redirecting force. In business, as in life, the greatest power comes from turning opposition into opportunity. The investors nodded, champagne glasses catching the light from the string of Edison bulbs overhead. Among them stood Sloane Whitman, Juliet's chief operating officer, a woman whose shark-like smile had sealed more deals than anyone cared to count. At 52, Sloane had orchestrated the aggressive expansion that transformed Juliet's boutique wellness studio into a $50 million enterprise. "This is going perfectly," Sloane whispered to her assistant Meredith. "The Journal, the Times Wellness Weekly, they're all here. By tomorrow morning, Juliet's face will be on every lifestyle page in the country." Near the bar, Cole Barrett held court with a cluster of fitness influencers. At 28, Cole was everything the modern fitness industry worshipped: carved abs, perfect stubble, 17 million Instagram followers, and a line of supplements that generated 7 figures monthly. He'd been brought in as Harmony Dynamics celebrity trainer, the face that would sell Tai Chi to millennials who thought meditation meant checking their phones less than 50 times a day. "Tai Chi's cool and all, so," Cole was saying loud enough for his voice to carry, "but let's be real, in an actual fight, all that flowing around wouldn't mean much against someone with real training. I mean, I respect the philosophy, but—" "Mr. Barrett," Juliet's voice cut through his commentary like a blade through silk, "perhaps you'd like to demonstrate with me. Show our guests how Tai Chi principles apply against real training." The rooftop fell silent. Cole's grin widened. "Sure, boss lady, but gently. Wright wouldn't want to mess up that perfect suit." Laughter rippled through the crowd as Cole strutted toward the stage, removing his designer blazer with theatrical flair. His fitted t-shirt revealed arms that had been featured in Men's Health magazine 3 times this year alone. Mason continued mopping, moving aside as Cole bounded up the steps. But as he shifted position, his foot caught the edge of the platform. The mop bucket tipped, sending soapy water cascading across the stage. Juliet stepped back, her white shoes now speckled with grimy droplets. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Mason said, immediately dropping to his knees to contain the spill. "Seriously," Cole's voice dripped with disdain. "We're trying to do a demonstration here. Can't the janitor work somewhere else?" Mason kept his eyes down, working the mop with practiced strokes. "I'll have it cleaned up in just a moment, sir." Juliet studied the maintenance worker for a beat longer than necessary. Something about the way he moved economical balanced, never wasting a gesture, caught her attention. "Actually," she said, an idea sparking in her mind, "this gentleman might help us with our demonstration." Mason looked up, confusion flickering across his weathered face. "Ma'am, you've been watching me practice," Juliet observed. "I've noticed you here during our rehearsals this week, always working, but always watching. Have you studied Tai Chi?" I've seen a little," Mason replied carefully. Cole laughed. "Oh, this is rich. You want the janitor to demonstrate what's next, the hot dog vendor teaching CrossFit?" "Why not?" Juliet's smile held a challenge. "Tai Chi is supposed to be for everyone, isn't it? Rich or poor, young or old. If our philosophy means anything, then this gentleman should be able to learn just as easily as anyone else." She turned to Mason. "What's your name?" "Mason Cole, ma'am." "Well, Mr. Cole, would you mind helping us just for fun? I'll show you some basic movements and you can try to mirror them. It would actually be perfect for our investors to see how accessible Tai Chi can be." Mason glanced toward Lila, who was watching with wide eyes. She gave him a tiny nod, the kind of encouragement only a daughter can give her father. "I suppose I could try," Mason said, setting his mop aside. "This is a waste of time," Sloane muttered to Meredith. "We should stick to the script." But Juliet was already positioning Mason beside her on the stage. "Just follow my movements," she instructed. "The fundamental principle is to move like water, never rigid, always flowing." She began with a simple sequence, grasping the sparrow's tail. Mason watched for a moment, then began to mirror her movements. His form wasn't just good. It was eerily precise, as if his body remembered patterns it had traced 1,000 times before. "Interesting," Juliet said, her competitive instincts stirring. "You've definitely done this before. Let's try something more advanced." She shifted into snake creeps down, a movement requiring significant flexibility and control. Mason followed his descent smooth as mercury, his balance perfect, despite the worn work boots that should have made the position awkward. The crowd had grown quiet. Phone cameras appeared, capturing the unexpected scene. The billionaire in her pristine suit and the janitor in his stained coveralls moving in unexpected harmony. "Okay," Juliet said, a new edge in her voice. "Let's make this more interesting. In Tai Chi, we have something called push hands. It's about sensing and redirecting your partner's energy. Mr. Cole, would you mind if we demonstrated?" Mason hesitated. "Ma'am, I should probably get back to—" "Come on, man," Cole called out. "Don't leave the boss hanging. Besides, I want to see this." Mason's shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, a decision being made. "All right, but just briefly." They stood facing each other, hands raised in the traditional starting position. Juliet pressed forward with her right palm, expecting the usual resistance or clumsy deflection she encountered with beginners. Instead, Mason's hand met hers with perfect pressure, not resisting, not yielding, but somehow making her force disappear into nothing. She found herself stepping forward into empty space, off balance for a fraction of a second, before Mason's gentle guidance restored her equilibrium. "Whoa!" someone in the crowd murmured. Juliet's eyes sharpened. She tried again, this time with a circular pressing motion designed to uproot an opponent's stance. Mason moved like smoke, his body turning at precisely the right angle to let her force flow past him, while his own hand found her elbow, redirecting her momentum back toward her center. She had to take a quick step to maintain balance. "You've trained," she said, no longer making it a question. "A little," Mason replied quietly. "Show me." Juliet commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. Really show me. She attacked now not with the demonstration moves she'd been using, but with real Tai Chi combat applications. Her hands flew in complex patterns, seeking to trap unbalance and control. Mason moved like water, finding its way through cracks in stone. Every technique she attempted seemed to dissolve the moment it met his response. He wasn't fighting her. He was simply occupying the spaces where her force wasn't turning her own momentum into elegant circles that led nowhere. Holy shit! Cole breathed his phone out and recording. The entire rooftop had gone silent except for the whisper of feet on the stage and the distant hum of the city below. Juliet increased her speed, her face flushed with the thrill of finding an unexpected challenge. She attempted a technique called diagonal flying, a movement designed to use an opponent's resistance against them. Mason flowed with it, his body rotating in a way that transformed her offensive movement into what looked like an elaborate dance step. For a moment they moved in perfect synchronization, as if they'd rehearsed this routine for years. "Who are you?" Juliet asked, breathing harder now. Mason didn't answer. Instead, he did something unexpected. As Juliet committed to a particularly aggressive push, he didn't redirect it. He absorbed it completely, his body becoming soft as cotton, drawing her forward until she was overextended. Then, with a gentleness that belied the technique's potential violence, he guided her into a spin that should have sent her tumbling. But his other hand was already there, supporting her lower back, turning what could have been a takedown into something that looked like a ballroom dance dip. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Juliet stood there, her perfect composure cracked for the first time anyone could remember. That was cloud hands into empty force. That's a master-level technique. Where did you learn it? Here and there, Mason said, already stepping back, his body language returning to that of a humble maintenance worker. "If you'll excuse me, ma'am, I should finish cleaning." "Wait, Juliet said, but Cole had already bounded onto the stage. "Okay, that was actually pretty impressive for a janitor," Cole announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who couldn't stand being upstaged. "But let's see how that mystic flowing stuff works against someone with actual combat training." He dropped into a fighter's stance, not Tai Chi, but mixed martial arts, the kind of position that appeared on pay-per-view events and drew millions of viewers. "Cole," Juliet warned, "this isn't that kind of—" But Cole was already moving, throwing a quick jab toward Mason's shoulder, not full force, but enough to make a point. Mason shifted slightly, the punch sliding past him, as if he'd simply decided to be somewhere else. Cole followed with a cross, then a hook. Each punch found only air, Mason moving with minimal effort, his face calm as still water. "Stop running," Cole growled, his face reddening. He threw a harder punch, this one aimed at Mason's chest. Mason's hand came up not to block, but to guide his palm, barely touching Cole's wrist. The young trainer's momentum carried him forward, and suddenly he was stumbling past Mason, completely off balance. Mason's hand found Cole's shoulder, steadying him before he could fall. "You okay?" Mason asked quietly. Cole spun around, fury in his eyes. "Don't patronize me, janitor." He lunged forward with a technique from his championship days, a takedown attempt that had won him 3 amateur titles. Mason flowed like water around a stone, his body turning in a way that transformed Cole's aggressive forward momentum into a spiral that ended with the trainer on one knee, Mason's gentle hand on his shoulder, preventing him from falling flat on his face. "No one learns anything on the ground," Mason said so quietly only Cole could hear. "Stand up. Try again if you want. But maybe ask yourself what you're trying to prove." Cole looked up at the maintenance worker, seeing him clearly for the first time. Mason's eyes held no mockery, no superiority, only a kind of sad understanding, as if he'd seen this scene play out too many times before. "How?" Cole asked, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "Practice," Mason replied simply, then stepped back and picked up his mop. The rooftop erupted in confused murmurs. Phones were out everywhere, capturing the scene from every angle. Sloane was already on her phone barking orders to someone about controlling the narrative and spinning this properly. Grace Lynn, a journalist from the Manhattan Voice, pushed through the crowd. At 34, she had a reputation for finding the real story beneath the public relations veneer. "Excuse me, Mr. Cole Mason?" "Cole, was it? Could I ask you a few questions?" "No comment." Mason said, not looking up from his mopping. But that was extraordinary. Where did you train? How long have you studied martial arts? I really need to finish my work, ma'am. Lila had stood up from her chair, her homework forgotten. She walked over to her father, slipping her small hand into his free one. Dad, that was amazing. Time to go, sweetheart, Mason said softly. Wait, Juliet called out, her command voice returning. Mr. Cole, I'd like to offer you a position. Clearly, you have skills that would be valuable to our organization. We could start you as an assistant instructor with a salary that would be— Thank you, ma'am, but I'm fine with my current job, Mason interrupted gently. It pays the bills, lets me be home for my daughter. That's all I need. But you could teach. You could share what you know. Mason paused, looking at Juliet with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sometimes the best teaching happens when no one knows there's a teacher in the room. Excuse me. He gathered his supplies and headed toward the service entrance, Lila beside him. The crowd parted, everyone staring at the janitor who had just made their $1 million Tai Chi master look like a student. Did you see that? Someone whispered. Who is he? I got it all on video. This is going viral for sure. Sloane appeared at Juliet's elbow. We need to control this. That janitor just made you look— He made me look like what I am. Juliet interrupted, her eyes still on Mason's retreating form. Someone who still has a lot to learn. That's not the message we want to send to investors. Isn't it? Juliet turned to face her COO. We're selling authenticity, aren't we? What could be more authentic than admitting there's always someone better, always more to learn? But Sloane was already working her phone, her mind spinning narratives and damage control. She didn't notice the way Juliet's gaze kept drifting to the service door, or the way the billionaire's hands unconsciously traced the movements Mason had shown her, trying to understand how someone who mopped floors could move like water given form. In the stairwell, Mason and Lila descended in companionable silence until Lila finally spoke. Dad, why didn't you tell them about— Some stories don't need to be told, sweetheart, Mason said gently. Besides, we've got dumplings to get, remember? But you were amazing. Everyone was staring. Mason stopped on the landing of the 32nd floor, kneeling to look his daughter in the eye. Lila, being amazing isn't about making other people see you. It's about being who you are even when no one's watching, especially then. But that mean man Cole, he was trying to hurt you? No, sweetheart. He was trying to hurt himself. He just didn't know it yet. They continued down the stairs, Mason's footfalls steady and sure. Behind them, the rooftop party continued, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. The investors were talking rapidly, phones pressed to ears. Cole stood at the edge of the roof, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. And Juliet Carter, who had built an empire on the principle of perfect control, found herself unbalanced in a way that had nothing to do with physical combat. Grace Lynn was already typing on her phone, her journalist instincts on fire. She'd covered hundreds of corporate events, but she'd never seen anything like this. A janitor who moved like a master. A billionaire who'd been beaten at her own game. A celebrity trainer humbled by someone society would consider beneath him. There was a story here, maybe the story of her career. She approached Sloane Whitman, who was deep in conversation with someone from her PR team. Ms. Whitman, could I get a statement about what just happened? Sloane's smile was sharp as winter. What happened was a wonderful demonstration of Tai Chi's universal appeal. Mr. Cole, one of our building's maintenance staff, showed natural aptitude that proves our point. Anyone can learn these techniques. But he didn't just learn them. He clearly mastered them. He made Miss Carter and Mr. Barrett look like— He made them look generous and inclusive, Sloane interrupted smoothly. Willing to share the stage with someone from any walk of life. That's the harmony dynamics philosophy, breaking down barriers between social classes through the democratic art of Tai Chi. Grace wasn't buying it, but she recorded the quote anyway. She'd learned long ago that what people didn't say was often more important than what they did. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, Mason and Lila emerged from the stairwell into the parking garage. Their old Honda Civic sat in the section reserved for building staff, looking small and tired among the Teslas and BMWs. Dad, Lila said as they buckled in, why do you work as a janitor if you could be a teacher? Mason started the engine, considering his answer. Remember when we talked about why rivers flow downhill? Because that's the easiest path. Not just the easiest, the most natural. Water doesn't fight to go uphill just to prove it can. It finds its level and does what it needs to do. He pulled out of the parking space, heading toward the exit. Right now, what I need to do is be your dad, pay our rent, and make sure you have everything you need for school. That's my natural path. But you could make more money teaching rich people. Money's just paper, sweetheart. It can't tuck you in at night or help with homework or be there when you have a bad dream. They drove through the Manhattan evening, the city lights blurring past like scattered stars. Neither of them noticed the black town car that pulled out behind them, maintaining a careful distance. Inside, Sloane Whitman spoke rapidly into her phone. I don't care what it costs. I want to know everything about Mason Cole by morning, employment history, background, everything. Something's not right here. Back on the rooftop, the party was winding down, but Juliet remained on the stage, moving through the same sequences she'd practiced with Mason. Every technique felt different now, infected with the memory of how easily he'd dissolved her force into nothing. Cole approached, his swagger notably diminished. Juliet, I'm sorry about what? Showing our investors exactly what we're up against. What do you mean? She stopped moving, fixing him with the stare that had cowed boardrooms full of executives. Don't you see? If a janitor can do what he just did, what does that say about everything we're building? Either we're selling something real, in which case we need to understand what he knows, or we're selling an illusion, in which case we're frauds. He got lucky, Cole said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Lucky. Juliet laughed, but there was no humor in it. He could have put you in the hospital, Cole. Instead, he kept you from falling 3 times. That's not luck, that's a level of control we can only dream about. She walked to the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, a janitor was taking his daughter for dumplings, carrying secrets she couldn't begin to guess. But she would find out. Juliet Carter hadn't built her empire by accepting mysteries. She solved them, controlled them, turned them into assets. We need him, she said quietly. What? Cole joined her at the railing. We need him to teach, to show us what we're missing. He said no. Everyone has a price. Cole was quiet for a moment. You know, when he had me off balance, when he could have hurt me, the look in his eyes, it wasn't mercy, it was sadness. Like he pitied me. Maybe he did. A janitor pitying me. That's rich. Juliet turned to study her celebrity trainer. Is it? You attacked a man who was just trying to do his job in front of his daughter to prove something that didn't need proving. Maybe pity was exactly the right response. She left Cole standing there and walked back across the rooftop, her heels clicking on the composite decking. The investors had mostly departed, leaving behind the usual detritus of a successful event. Empty glasses, forgotten name tags, the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Grace Lynn intercepted her at the elevator. Ms. Carter, one question. Do you think what happened tonight will affect investor confidence in Harmony Dynamics? Juliet considered the reporter for a long moment. Grace had intelligent eyes, the kind that saw through corporate spin. Off the record, if you prefer. I think tonight showed that there's more to Tai Chi than what we're selling, and that should either terrify my investors or inspire them. I haven't decided which yet. And what about you? Are you terrified or inspired? Juliet smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached her eyes. Both, Ms. Lynn. Definitely both. The elevator doors closed, leaving Grace alone on the rooftop. She looked at her phone, at the notes she'd been taking, at the videos she'd captured. This was bigger than just a corporate event gone strange. This was about authenticity in an age of artificial everything, about mastery hiding in minimum wage work, about the assumptions people made based on appearance and status. She thought about Mason Cole, the way he'd moved, the way he'd chosen mercy over dominance. There was a story there buried beneath the surface. And Grace Lynn was very good at digging. In Chen's Dumpling House, a small restaurant squeezed between a dry cleaner and a phone repair shop, Mason and Lila sat at their usual table by the window. The owner, Mr. Chen, brought their order without being asked: pork dumplings for Lila, vegetable for Mason, extra sauce on the side. Tough day, Mr. Chen asked in Mandarin, noticing something different in Mason's posture. Complicated. Mason replied in the same language, his accent nearly perfect. Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose. He'd been serving Mason for 3 years and had never heard him speak anything but English. "You surprise me, my friend." "Sometimes we surprise ourselves," Mason said, switching back to English for Lila's benefit. After Mr. Chen returned to the kitchen, Lila looked at her father with wonder. "You speak Chinese." "A little." "What else don't I know about you?" Mason reached across the table to ruffle her hair. "Hopefully nothing important. Eat your dumplings before they get cold." They ate in comfortable silence, the city flowing past outside like a river of lights and lives. Mason's phone buzzed the building supervisor, asking if he could cover an extra shift tomorrow. He texted back yes, same as always. "Dad," Lila said through a mouthful of dumpling, "do you ever wish things were different?" "Different how?" "I don't know. That we had more money, lived in a better place, that Mom was still—" She trailed off, suddenly interested in her chopsticks. Mason was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I wish your mom was still here every day, but everything else? We have what we need, Lila. A roof over our heads, food on the table, and each other. That's not nothing. But those people tonight, they have so much more." "Do they?" "That woman, Miss Carter. She's got all the money in the world, but she spent tonight trying to prove she was the best at something. The young man Cole, he's famous, but he needed everyone to see how tough he was. Sometimes having more just means you have more to lose." Lila considered this, her 9-year-old mind working through complex ideas. "But you beat them both. Doesn't that make you the best?" "There's no best, sweetheart. There's just practice and patience and trying to do better today than yesterday. Besides," he smiled, "I didn't beat anyone. I just didn't lose. That's the same thing." "No, it's really not. But you'll understand when you're older." They finished their meal and walked home through the cooling evening. Their apartment building was a pre-war walk-up in Queens, 5 stories of fading brick and fire escapes. The stairs creaked as they climbed to the 4th floor, and Mason had to jiggle the key just right to open their door. The apartment was small but clean one-bedroom that Lila had while Mason slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. The walls were covered with Lila's artwork and school achievement certificates. A small shrine sat in the corner with a photo of a woman who shared Lila's eyes and Mason's smile. "Homework, then bed." Mason said the nightly ritual as comfortable as breathing. While Lila worked on her math problems, Mason stood by the window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, powerful people were probably discussing him, dissecting what had happened, trying to fit him into a box they could understand. He'd stayed invisible for 3 years, just another face in the crowd of people who kept the city running. Now that invisibility was cracked, perhaps broken entirely. His phone rang. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. This time he answered. "Mr. Cole." The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "My name is Victoria Nash. I'm a producer with Urban Legends, the streaming documentary series. We'd like to talk to you about what happened tonight." Mason hung up. The phone rang again, different number. He turned it off entirely. "Dad?" Lila looked up from her homework. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. How's the math going?" "I hate fractions." "No one likes fractions, but they're useful, like learning to see parts of a whole, understanding how things fit together." He sat beside her, working through the problems with patient explanations. This was his world, these quiet moments, this small space, this precious routine. But he could feel the outside pressing in the weight of attention he'd neither sought nor wanted. After Lila was asleep, Mason returned to the window. The city never slept, and neither, it seemed, would he tonight. He thought about the woman in white Juliet Carter and the surprise in her eyes when her force found no purchase. He thought about Cole Barrett, all that strength with no direction. He thought about the cameras, the questions, the sudden visibility after years of careful invisibility. In her Tribeca penthouse, Juliet Carter stood at her own window, looking out at the same city from a very different height. She'd watched the videos dozens of times now, Mason moving like smoke, like water, like something elemental and unstoppable. Her shoulders still remembered the gentle pressure of his hand guiding her out of her own mistake. "Who are you?" she asked the night. The night has always kept its secrets, but tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow Sloane would have her report. Tomorrow, They would know everything about Mason Cole. Tomorrow she would make him an offer he couldn't refuse. Or so she thought. Because Juliet Carter, for all her success and power and skill, had never met someone who had already refused everything the world had to offer, who had chosen invisibility over fame, simplicity over complexity, presence over ambition. She was about to learn that some people couldn't be bought, couldn't be pressured, couldn't be moved. Like water, they simply found their level and stayed there no matter how hard you tried to make them rise. The next morning arrived with unseasonable rain, turning Manhattan into a mirror of itself, every surface reflecting the gray sky above. Mason's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., same as always, but this time he found 17 missed calls on his phone when he turned it back on. 3 from unknown numbers, 4 from the building supervisor, and 10 from a number that Google told him belonged to Harmony Dynamics corporate headquarters. He deleted them all and went to make breakfast. Lila emerged from her room at 6, already dressed for school, her backpack heavy with books. She found her father sitting at their small kitchen table, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands, while he stared at nothing in particular. "You're worried, Bo," she said, not making it a question. "Just thinking. About last night." Mason looked at his daughter, really looked at her. 9 years old, but those eyes held wisdom that came from losing a mother at 6, from watching her father work 2 jobs to keep them afloat, from understanding early that the world didn't owe anyone anything. "It might get complicated for a while," he admitted, "because you showed them what you can do, because I showed them anything at all." The rain drummed against their window as they ate breakfast in silence, oatmeal with sliced bananas, the same meal they'd shared every morning for 3 years. Routine was safety. Routine was invisible, but Mason could feel that invisibility dissolving like sugar in water. His phone rang. The building supervisor. "Mason, where the hell are you? There's media all over the lobby asking about you." "Media?" "Yeah, reporters, cameras, the whole circus. Something about last night." "Look, I don't care what you did, but you better get in through the service entrance. And corporate's been calling. The big boss wants to see you." "Which big boss?" "Carter herself. Her office 9 sharp. Don't be late." The line went dead. Mason looked at Lila, who was pretending not to have heard. "I'll walk myself to school," she said quietly. "Not in this weather. Come on, we'll go together." They took the long way, avoiding the main streets, Mason's old army instincts kicking in as he mapped alternate routes in his head. The rain helped, giving them cover under a shared umbrella, making them just another parent and child in the morning rush. But he could feel the change in the air, the way attention bent toward him like flowers following the sun. At PS 47, Lila turned to him before going inside. "Dad, are we going to have to move again?" The question hit him like a physical blow. They'd moved twice before when things got complicated, when the past came knocking. He'd promised her this time would be different. "I hope not, sweetheart. But if we do, then we do. Together. Like always." She hugged him quickly, fiercely, then disappeared into the school. Mason stood in the rain for a moment, watching her go, before turning toward Manhattan and whatever waited for him there. The service entrance to the Meridian building was supposed to be his secret route, but 3 reporters had already found it. They rushed toward him, phones extended like weapons. "Mason Cole, can you comment on last night's viral video? Is it true you're a former military operative? What's your relationship with Juliet Carter?" He pushed past them without a word, badging in with security, who looked at him with new interest. Everyone had seen the video. In the service elevator, his phone showed him why. The footage from last night had been edited, remixed, set to music turned into memes. "Janitor destroys billionaire and Instagram star" had 12 million views and climbing. Someone had slowed down the moment where he'd redirected Cole's punch, analyzing it frame by frame like evidence of the supernatural. Mason closed his eyes and practiced breathing exercises he'd learned in places he tried not to remember. The executive floor of the Meridian building was a different world from the basement where Mason usually worked. Glass and chrome and modern art that cost more than he made in a decade. The receptionist, a young man with perfect hair and an uncertain smile, directed him to wait. He didn't wait long. Mr. Cole, Sloan Whitman, emerged from a conference room, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "So good of you to come. I was told it wasn't optional." Nothing's optional when it comes to protecting our interests. She gestured for him to follow. Ms. Carter is waiting. Juliet's office occupied the building's southwest corner, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of the Hudson River and beyond. She stood with her back to them when they entered, still in white, though today it was a business suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Leave us, Sloan." "But leave us." Sloane's jaw tightened, but she withdrew, closing the door with a click that sounded like a trap being set. Juliet turned around and Mason saw she hadn't slept either. There was something different in her eyes now, a hunger that hadn't been there before. "Sergeant First Class Mason Cole," she said, laying a manila folder on her desk. "Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, 4 bronze stars. Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha. 7 deployments to Afghanistan, 3 to Iraq, 2 to places that are still classified. Left the Army 5 years ago after your wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Took a job as a janitor 3 years ago, 6 months after she died." Mason said nothing. "The file gets interesting after that," Juliet continued, "because that's where it stops. No social media, no public records beyond the basics, no connections to your former unit. It's like you decided to disappear." "I decided to live quietly. With your skills, your training. You could be making 7 figures in private security. You could be teaching at the highest levels. Instead, you mop floors. Someone has to." She moved closer, circling him like a predator studying prey. "You know what I think you're hiding. The question is from what? The question," Mason said quietly, "is why you think it's any of your business. You made it my business when you humiliated me in front of my investors. I did exactly what you asked. You wanted a demonstration. You got one. I got more than that." She picked up a tablet showing him analytics. "The video has been shared 50 million times across all platforms. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Everyone wants to know about the janitor who made the billionaire Tai Chi master look like a beginner." I never meant." "I know." She set the tablet down, her voice softening. "That's what makes it worse. You weren't trying to show me up. You were just being. And that being was so far beyond what I've spent 20 years trying to achieve that it makes everything I've built feel like a lie." Mason looked at her, then really looked at her. Beneath the polished exterior, the designer clothes, the corporate armor, he saw someone he recognized. Someone driven by loss, shaped by pain, using achievement to fill a void that achievement could never fill. "It's not a lie," he said. "You've helped thousands of people find balance, find peace. That matters." "Does it? When there's someone like you out there showing what real mastery looks like." "Real mastery isn't about being better than others. It's about being better than yourself." "Fortune cookie wisdom." She laughed bitterly. "That's your insight." "No. Hard-earned truth." He moved to the window looking out at the city. "You want to know why I hide? Because the last time I didn't, people got hurt. The kind of hurt that doesn't heal." "What happened?" "I came back from my last deployment to find my wife dying. Lung cancer stage 4. Nothing to be done. 6 months, they said. I made those 6 months count. Sold everything, took her everywhere she wanted to go, held her hand through every treatment, every bad night, every goodbye." Juliet was quiet, the predator stance softening into something more human. "After she died," Mason continued, "I was lost. Angry. All this training, all these skills, and I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. I started fighting. Not professionally, just bar streets anywhere someone would throw a punch. I was looking for something I couldn't name, maybe punishment, maybe peace, maybe just an ending. What stopped you?" "Lila, my daughter. I came home one night, blood on my knuckles, whiskey on my breath, and she was waiting up. 6 years old, already lost her mother, and she looked at me like she was about to lose her father too. Not to death, but to something worse, to becoming someone she couldn't recognize." He turned back to Juliet. "So I stopped. Got the janitor job, found our apartment, built our routine. Became invisible. Because invisible was safe. Invisible meant Lila had a father who came home every night, helped with homework, made breakfast every morning. Invisible meant stable. And last night was a mistake." "No." Juliet said firmly. Last night was truth. You can't hide what you are, Mason. It comes out whether you want it or not. Watch me. I don't think you understand. She pulled up more screens on her tablet. The story's already out there. By noon, every news outlet in the country will know who you are. Your military record, your skills, everything. Sloan made sure of that. You leaked my information. Not me. Sloan. She thinks it's good PR for a decorated veteran working as a janitor finds purpose through Tai Chi. It writes itself. Mason's hands clenched the first sign of real emotion he'd shown. My daughter will be protected. I guarantee that. But only if you work with us. You're threatening a 9-year-old girl. I'm offering to help her. There's a difference. Juliet moved to her desk, pulling out a contract. 1 year. You teach our master class. Real teaching, not the watered-down version we sell to executives. An exchange salary of $200,000 full benefits, and we handle all media requests, control the narrative. Your daughter gets privacy security if needed, and a college fund. No. $300,000. The answer won't change. Everyone has a price. You're right, Mason said, heading for the door. Mine is my daughter's normal life, and that's not for sale. You think saying no will make this go away? Juliet called after him. The story's out there now. The only question is whether you control it or it controls you. Mason paused at the door. I've been controlled by worse things than stories, Ms. Carter. Have a good day. He left her standing there, the contract unused on her desk. In the elevator, his phone buzzed with a text from Lila's school. Please call immediately regarding your daughter. His blood turned to ice. The run to PS 47 took 12 minutes, which might have been a record if Mason had been keeping track. He burst through the front doors to find Lila sitting in the principal's office unharmed, but clearly upset. 3 other kids were there too, one with a bloody nose. Mr. Cole, Principal Martinez stood up. We need to discuss what happened. Is she hurt? No, but... Mason knelt in front of his daughter. Are you okay? They said things about you, Lila whispered. About the video. Called you a fake, a liar. Said you were just trying to get famous. And I showed them they were wrong. Mason looked at the kid with the bloody nose, then back at his daughter. Her knuckles were scraped. Lila threw the first punch, Principal Martinez said. That's automatic suspension regardless of provocation. How long took? 3 days, and she'll need to write an apology. Mason nodded, taking Lila's hand. We'll handle it at home. They walked out together, Lila having to take 3 steps for each of his. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained heavy and watching. I'm sorry, she said in a small voice, for defending your father. For fighting. You always said fighting doesn't solve anything. Mason stopped walking, crouching down to her level. I said fighting doesn't solve anything worth solving. There's a difference between violence as a solution and standing up for people you love. But I got suspended. Sometimes doing the right thing has consequences. The question is whether you can live with them. Can you... With what's happening because of last night? He thought about the reporters, the leaked military record, Juliet's offer, the story spinning out of control. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together. They went home to find their apartment building surrounded by news vans. Mrs. Chen from 4B was on the front steps, arms crossed, refusing to let anyone inside. This is private property, she was saying in accented English. You go now or I call police. Mrs. Chen, Mason called out. It's okay. She turned to relief flooding her face. Mr. Mason, these people, they crazy. Say you some kind of kung fu master. I tell them you just fix things, mind own business. Thank you. He guided Lila past the cameras, ignoring the shouted questions. Inside, Mrs. Chen followed them. Is true, she asked quietly. What they say, some of it. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You good man. Good father. That's what true. She patted Lila's head. You hungry? I make dumpling. We're okay, Mrs. Chen. Thank you. She left them, but not before shooting one more glare at the reporters visible through the lobby glass. In their apartment, Mason found 17 more messages on the answering machine he'd forgotten he owned. Offers from security firms, interview requests, someone claiming to be from Netflix about a documentary. He deleted them all. Dad, Lila said from the couch where she was supposed to be thinking about her actions. What are we going to do? Right now, lunch, then homework. I'm suspended. Doesn't mean you stop learning. Get your books. They spent the afternoon on math and reading the normal routine of life raft in an increasingly stormy sea. But Mason could feel the world pressing in through the walls. His phone turned to silent, lit up continuously with calls and texts. Someone had leaked his number, too. At 3 o'clock, a knock at the door interrupted Lila's essay on why violence isn't the answer to disagreements. Mason appreciated the irony. He looked through the peephole to find Grace Lynn, the journalist from last night. I'm not doing interviews, Key, he said through the door. I'm not here for an interview. I'm here to warn you. Something in her tone made him open the door, keeping the chain on. Warn me about what? Sloan Whitman. She's planning something for tonight. A publicity stunt. She's got Cole Barrett ready to challenge you publicly, make it seem like last night was staged. If you don't show up, they'll spin it as cowardice. If you do, they'll turn it into a circus. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't like bullies and I don't like lies. And because there's a real story here about power and perception and what we value as a society. That story deserves better than Sloane's manipulation. Mason studied her through the gap. What do you want? Nothing. Maybe someday when you're ready, you'll tell me your story. The real one. But that's your choice. This is just a heads up from someone who knows what it's like to be caught in someone else's narrative. She turned to go, then paused. Oh, and the building at 483 West Broadway. The one where Sloane's planning her ambush. There's a service entrance on the north side that connects to the subway, in case you needed to know. She was gone before Mason could respond. He closed the door, thinking. The smart move was to stay home, ignore it all, let it blow over. But he knew Sloane's type. She wouldn't let it blow over. She'd escalate until she got what she wanted or destroyed what she couldn't have. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but the image attached made his blood run cold. It was Lila's school taken from across the street. Just the building, nothing threatening, but the message was clear. They knew where she was vulnerable. Another text followed immediately. Tonight, 8 p.m., 483 West Broadway. End this the right way or we'll end it ours. S. Mason looked at his daughter working on her essay with careful concentration, tongue poking out slightly as she wrote. She deserved better than being a pawn in someone's game. He made a decision. Lila, how do you feel about visiting Uncle Tom tonight? She looked up surprised. Tom wasn't really her uncle, but an old army buddy who lived in New Jersey. They only visited him when things got complicated. Are we running? No, you are. Just for tonight. I need to handle something. The woman from the text. Sometimes Mason forgot how observant his daughter was. Yes. You're going to fight. I'm going to end something. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. Mom would tell you to be careful. Mom would tell me not to go at all. But she'd understand why you have to. Mason pulled his daughter into a hug. When did you get so wise? Tuesday. Despite everything, he laughed. They packed a small bag for Lila, just overnight things. The reporters had thinned out as evening approached, and Mason was able to get them to his car without much harassment. The drive to Tom's took an hour, during which Lila fell asleep against the window, her breath fogging the glass in small, perfect circles. Tom met them at the door, all 6 feet 4 inches of him still built like the linebacker he'd been before the Army. Heard you've been making waves, brother. Trying not to drown in them. Need backup. Mason looked at his sleeping daughter, Tom already lifting her gently from the car. Just keep her safe. You know I will. But Mason, I saw the video. You sure you want to go back to that world? I'm not going back to anything. I'm just finishing something that should never have started. Tom studied him with eyes that had seen the same wars, the same losses. Be careful, brother. The skills never leave, but neither do the costs. Mason knew he was right, but he also knew that sometimes the only way out was through. The drive back to the city gave him time to think, to prepare. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't asked for it, but here it was anyway. The past had a way of finding you no matter how deep you buried it. 483 West Broadway turned out to be an abandoned warehouse in Tribeca, the kind of place developers bought and forgot about while property values climbed. The front entrance was lit with professional lighting rigs, cameras already set up a small crowd gathering. Mason could see Cole Barrett warming up, throwing shadow punches for his Instagram followers. But Mason took Grace Lynn's advice, finding the service entrance on the north side. It was unlocked as if waiting for him. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed into a makeshift arena. Training mats covered the floor, more cameras on tripods, and at the center, Sloane Whitman in a red dress that looked like blood under the lights. "I didn't think you'd come," she said when she saw him. "You threatened my daughter. I motivated you. There's a difference." "No, there isn't." She smiled that shark smile. "Well, you're here now. That's what matters. The show starts in 30 minutes. Cole's been training all day studying the footage, preparing. This time will be different." "Will it?" "Oh yes. See, last night you caught us by surprise. Tonight we're ready. Cole knows your moves now, your patterns. And there are stakes. Stakes. If Cole wins, you work for us. Sign the contract, become our spokesman, the whole package. If you win, really win, not just your defensive dancing, we leave you alone. Forever. No more reporters, no more threats, just your quiet little life back. And if I don't fight, then the story becomes about the coward janitor who was exposed as a fraud, and that story follows your daughter for the rest of her life." Mason looked around the warehouse. He could see the exits, the angles, the spaces. His mind automatically calculated distances, possibilities, probabilities. The old training never really went away. It just waited. "One condition," he said. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "I'm always in a position to negotiate." He let something shift in his voice and his stance, and saw Sloane take an involuntary step back. "The fight happens, but no cameras. No recordings. Just the people here to witness. That defeats the entire purpose." "No, it doesn't. You want to humiliate me? Fine. But you do it in person, not for clicks and views. That's the deal." Sloane considered, then shook her head. "The cameras stay on. Then I leave." "Then your daughter—" Mason moved then, not attacking, but simply closing the distance between them faster than Sloane could process. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel his breath, see the absolute emptiness in his eyes where fear should have been. "Finish that sentence," he said quietly. "Please give me a reason." Sloane swallowed hard, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely afraid. "The cameras stay on, but we don't broadcast live. We only use the footage if you lose. And if I win, we delete everything. Pretend tonight never happened." Mason stepped back, the threat dissipating like smoke. "Deal." The crowd was growing now. He recognized some faces from last night's rooftop party, investors and influencers drawn to spectacle like moths to flame. Juliet entered from the main entrance dressed in black, this time her face unreadable. "You didn't have to come," she told Mason. "Yes, I did." "This isn't what I wanted." "But it's what you allowed." She had no answer for that. Cole bounded into the center of the mat, all nervous energy and manufactured confidence. He'd changed his hair, his outfit trying to project a different image from the man who'd been humbled the night before. "Ready for round 2, janitor?" Mason didn't answer, just walked onto the mat. He could feel the shift in the room's energy, anticipation crackling like electricity before a storm. "Gentlemen," Sloane announced, playing to the cameras despite their supposed deal. "Last night raised questions. Tonight provides answers. Mr. Barrett, Mr. Cole, you may begin when ready." Cole didn't wait. He came in fast and low, having learned from his previous mistakes. No wild swings this time, but calculated attacks, probing for weaknesses. Mason gave ground, watching, reading the younger man's intentions in the telegraph of his muscles. "Come on," Cole growled. "Fight back. Show them what you really are." But Mason continued his defensive flow, redirecting energy rather than meeting it. Cole's frustration built with each failed attack, each technique that found only empty air or gentle redirection. Then Cole changed tactics. Instead of attacking Mason directly, he suddenly spun and drove toward the crowd, toward Juliet. It was a feint meant to force Mason to act, to protect. And it worked. Mason moved faster than he had last night, faster than most human beings could move. He intercepted Cole's path, caught his extended arm, and in one fluid motion redirected the younger man's momentum into a spiral that should have ended with Cole on his back. Should have. But Cole had been studying, preparing. He used Mason's redirection, added his own force to it, turned the spiral into a modified takedown that caught Mason by surprise. For the first time, Mason found himself defensive not by choice, but by necessity. The crowd gasped. Cole pressed his advantage, mixing martial arts with street fighting, with the kind of desperate creativity that came from having everything to prove. Mason gave ground, still not attacking, but no longer completely in control. "See?" Cole shouted to the cameras. "He's not invincible. He's just good at running." Something shifted in Mason's eyes. Lila wasn't here. She was safe with Tom. But he thought about her watching this later if the footage got out. Thought about her seeing her father called a coward, a runner, a fraud. The next time Cole attacked Mason, didn't redirect. He met force with force, but force of a different kind. Not the violent collision Cole expected, but something more like the ocean meeting the shore. Cole's punch connected with Mason's blocking arm, but instead of stopping, it seemed to sink into something that absorbed the impact, completely drew it in, and then sent it back. Cole stumbled backward, his entire right side numb from the returned force of his own blow. "What was that?" someone in the crowd whispered. Mason advanced, now still not attacking, but no longer retreating. Each step forward seemed to take space away from Cole, reducing his options, cornering him without walls. "Stop playing with me," Cole snarled, throwing a combination that would have dropped most fighters. Mason flowed through it like water through a net. His hands found Cole's shoulders gentle as a friend's greeting, and suddenly Cole was airborne. Not thrown violently, but lifted and guided in an arc that seemed to defy physics. He landed on his feet, but only because Mason's hand on his elbow ensured it. "Why?" Cole gasped. "Why won't you just fight me?" "Because you're not my enemy," Mason replied loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're just young and scared and trying to matter. I've been there. Fighting you won't help either of us." "I'm not scared of anything. You're scared of being ordinary, of being forgotten, of all those followers realizing you're just another guy with good genetics and a marketing team." Cole's face went red. "Shut up. You're scared that without the cameras, without the image, you're nothing. That's why you need to beat me so badly. Not for them, for yourself." Cole screamed and charged, abandoning all technique for raw aggression. Mason sighed, and when they connected, it was like watching water absorb a stone. Cole's momentum vanished into Mason's centeredness. His fury dissolved into calm, and somehow, impossibly, the two men ended up standing still in the center of the mat. Cole's fist pressed against Mason's palm, going nowhere. "I could hurt you now," Mason said quietly, only for Cole. "Break your arm, destroy your knee, end your career. That's what the old me would have done. But you know what I learned? Breaking people is easy. Building them back up is hard. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to step back. We're going to bow to each other like this means something, and then you're going to go home and figure out who you are when the cameras aren't rolling. And if I don't..." Mason let him feel it then just for a second. The real strength behind his gentleness, the iron wrapped in silk. Cole's eyes widened as he realized how completely he was at Mason's mercy, how every moment of the fight had been Mason's choice, not his. "But you will say," Mason said, releasing him, "because despite everything, you're not a bad person. Just lost." Cole stepped back, shaking. The warehouse was silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Then slowly Cole bowed. Not the mockery of respect he'd shown before, but something real, something that came from understanding how close he'd come to an edge he hadn't even known existed. Mason returned the bow. "This is bullshit," Sloane started to say, but Juliet cut her off. "No, this is exactly what we claim to teach. Conflict resolution without violence. Victory without defeat." She looked at Mason. "You win." "I didn't win anything," Mason replied. "I just didn't lose." He turned to leave, but Cole called out, "Wait, that technique, the one where you absorbed my punch and sent it back, what was that?" Mason paused. "It doesn't have a name. My teacher called it listening to lightning. You take in violence so completely that it becomes something else, but it takes years to learn and costs more than most people want to pay." "What did it cost you?" "Everything worth losing. and a few things that weren't. He walked toward the service exit, but Sloane wasn't done. You think you can just walk away? The footage will be deleted, Juliet said firmly, as agreed. We had a deal if he won. He didn't win. He won, Cole interrupted, surprising everyone. He won the moment I walked in here angry. Everything after that was just him trying to teach me something. You're fired, Sloane spat at him. Good, Cole replied. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. Mason was almost at the door when Juliet caught up to him. What you did tonight, what you showed us, it changes everything. No, it doesn't. Tomorrow I go back to work. My daughter goes back to school. Life continues. But the questions will fade. They always do. In a week, there'll be a new viral video, a new story. That's the beauty of the modern world. Nothing stays important for long. And if I want to learn, really learn, not the performance we sell. Mason studied her for a long moment. You know where I work? The basement's always open. You'd teach me. I'd teach anyone who's really ready to learn. But most people aren't. They want the power without the practice, the strength without the sacrifice. I've sacrificed plenty. You've sacrificed for success. That's different than sacrificing success for something better. He left her standing there processing that. The service entrance led to a maintenance tunnel that connected to the subway, just as Grace Lynn had said. Mason walked through the underbelly of the city, surrounded by the rumble of trains and the whisper of steam, feeling more at home here in the darkness than he had in the lights above. When he emerged at his usual stop, his phone showed a text from Tom. A picture of Lila asleep on the couch, safe and peaceful. Another text from an unknown number that turned out to be Cole. Thank you. Mason deleted both conversations and walked home through empty streets. The reporters were gone, the story already shifting to something else. By tomorrow, other scandals would claim the headlines. By next week, he'd be invisible again. But when he got to his apartment, he found Grace Lynn sitting on his front steps. No camera, no recorder, just a cup of coffee and tired eyes. I'm not doing an interview, he said. I know. I just wanted to tell you that Sloane's been fired. Juliet cleaned house tonight, and the footage has been deleted. I made sure of it. How I have my ways. She stood to leave, then turned back. You know, the real story isn't about a janitor who knows Tai Chi. It's about a society that only values what it can see, measure, and monetize. Your invisibility is a kind of rebellion against that. It's not rebellion, it's just life. Maybe that's the most rebellious thing of all. She walked away, leaving Mason alone with the night and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, his daughter was safe, the wolves had been driven back, and he had a floor to mop in the morning. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, each step a meditation, each breath a practice. In the morning, he'd pick up Lila, make breakfast, help with homework. The routine would continue, the invisible life would resume. But something had changed, not in the world which would forget him soon enough, but in himself. The skills he'd buried weren't gone just sleeping. The warrior he'd been wasn't dead, just transformed. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what his daughter needed to see. That strength wasn't about dominance, but about choice. That power wasn't about being seen, but about seeing clearly. That sometimes the greatest victory was refusing to fight at all. The morning after this warehouse confrontation dawned crisp and clear, as if the universe had decided to wash the slate clean. Mason picked up Lila from Tom's house just after sunrise, finding her already dressed and ready, her overnight bag packed with the military precision he'd inadvertently taught her through years of careful routine. Is it over? She asked as they drove back to the city. The loud part is, Mason replied, navigating through early morning traffic. But endings have a way of becoming beginnings. That sounds like something Mom would say. She was smarter than both of us combined. They returned to find their apartment building blessedly free of reporters, though Mrs. Chen was still standing guard at the entrance, armed with a broom and suspicious eyes. She relaxed when she saw them patting Lila's head affectionately. Good you back. That woman come by earlier, leave something for you. What woman? Fancy one. White clothes, sad eyes. Juliet. Mason found the envelope slipped under his door, expensive paper with his name written in precise calligraphy. Inside a single line, the offer stands, not for employment, but for knowledge. He crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash, then went about making breakfast as if the last 48 hours hadn't happened. But Lila watched him with those two wise eyes seeing through his attempt at normalcy. She wants to learn from you. A lot of people want a lot of things. But she's different. She actually saw you. Mason paused in scrambling eggs, considering his daughter's words. It was true that most people saw what they wanted to see projected their own needs and fears onto others like shadows on a wall. But Juliet had seen something real, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Seeing and understanding are different things, sweetheart. So teach her to understand. When did you become my life coach? Thursday. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, but Mason could feel the weight of unfinished business pressing against the walls of their small sanctuary. His phone, mercifully quiet for the past few hours, buzzed with a text from his supervisor, "Need you to come in early, special cleaning job on the executive floor." Mason knew what that meant. Juliet was orchestrating another meeting, but this time on his terms, in his domain. He appreciated the gesture even as he resented the manipulation. He dropped Lila at school, watching until she was safely inside before heading to work. The 3-day suspension would start tomorrow, giving them one normal day to pretend everything was fine. But he could already see the other parents whispering, pointing, recognizing him from the viral videos that had consumed their social media feeds. The Meridian Building's service entrance welcomed him like an old friend, familiar and unpretentious. He changed into his coveralls in the basement locker room, collected his supplies, and took the service elevator to the executive floor. But instead of Juliet's office, he was directed to a conference room that had been cleared of furniture, its polished floor reflecting the morning light. Juliet was there, but not alone. Cole Barrett sat in a corner looking smaller, without his usual bravado, and Grace Lynn leaned against the window, notebook in hand, but closed. Most surprisingly, Sloane Whitman stood near the door, her power suit replaced by simple athletic wear, her shark smile nowhere to be seen. "I fired her 2 days ago," Juliet said, following Mason's gaze. "But some lessons need to be learned the hard way." "What is this?" Mason asked, setting down his cleaning supplies with deliberate normalcy. "An intervention," Grace said, "or maybe a confession, or possibly just a group of people who've realized they've been looking at the world backwards." Cole stood up, his movements tentative. "I wanted to apologize, properly. Not for the cameras or the image, but actually apologize. I've been an ass." "You've been young," Mason corrected. "There's a difference." "I'm 28. That's not that young. I've known 60-year-olds who were younger. Age isn't about years." Sloane cleared her throat, the sound strange coming from someone who usually commanded attention rather than requesting it. "I've built my entire career on controlling narratives, spinning stories, making people see what I wanted them to see. Last night you made me realize I've never actually seen anything real, just reflections of reflections. And now you want enlightenment." Mason's tone wasn't mocking, just tired. "You all want me to teach you some secret that will make everything make sense." "No," Juliet said quietly. "We want to understand why you choose to stay invisible when you could be anything." Mason walked to the window, looking out at the city waking up below. Millions of people starting their days, each carrying their own secrets, their own skills, their own reasons for hiding or revealing themselves. "There's an old story," he began, not turning around, about a master archer who could hit a target in complete darkness. Students came from everywhere to learn his secret. They expected special breathing techniques, ancient wisdom, magical bows. You know what he taught them? To close their eyes and stop trying to hit anything. Most of them left disappointed. The few who stayed learned that not shooting was the hardest shot of all. "That's not an answer," Sloane said. "Isn't it?" Mason turned to face them. "You all came here thinking I have something you lack, some secret technique, some hidden knowledge. But what if the secret is that there is no secret? What if the power you're looking for comes from giving up the search for power?" Cole shifted uncomfortably. "But last night, what you did to me, that was power." "No, that was absence. I created a space where your force had nowhere to go." "That's not the same as meeting force with force." "Teach us," Juliet said simply. "Not for money, not for fame, just teach us." Mason studied each of them in turn. 4 successful people who discovered that success wasn't enough. 4 seekers who didn't yet understand what they were seeking. "One lesson," he said finally. "One morning. After that, you go back to your lives and leave me to mine." They agreed eagerly, too eagerly. Mason had them remove their shoes stand in a circle. He started with breathing, the most basic element that everyone thought they understood. "Breathe naturally," he instructed. They did, or thought they did. But Mason could see the effort in it, the conscious control, the trying to breathe correctly. "Now stop breathing." "What?" Cole looked confused. "Stop trying to breathe. Let your body breathe itself." It took them nearly 20 minutes to understand the difference, to let go of conscious control and trust their bodies to know what they'd been doing since birth. Grace got it first, her journalistic mind used to observing without interfering. Sloane struggled the most, every breath an act of will she couldn't quite release. "This is pointless," Sloane finally said. "We're just standing here breathing." "Are you?" Mason asked. "Or are you standing here trying to breathe?" "There's a difference." He moved them through basic Tai Chi positions, but not the way they expected. Instead of perfecting forms, he had them focus on the spaces between movements, the moments of transition where one thing became another. "You're all trying to get somewhere," he observed as they moved. "Trying to complete the form, reach the next position. But what if the journey is the destination? What if the space between is where everything actually happens?" Juliet, despite her 20 years of training, found herself struggling with this approach. Everything she'd learned was about precision, perfection, achieving ideal forms. Mason was asking her to forget the destination and exist in the traveling. "I don't understand," she admitted, frustration creeping into her voice. "Good," Mason replied. "Understanding is overrated. Feel instead." He had them push hands, but not competitively. The goal wasn't to unbalance their partner, but to maintain mutual balance, to create a circuit of energy that supported both people. "Business is about winning," Sloane protested as she practiced with Grace. "Someone wins, someone loses. That's how the world works." "Is it?" Mason asked. "Or is that just the story we tell ourselves to justify cruelty?" He paired with Cole, demonstrating. Their hands met, and Cole immediately tried to push to establish dominance. Mason didn't resist or redirect. He simply became empty, a void that Cole's force fell into without effect. "Feel that?" Mason asked. "You're fighting yourself. I'm just space for you to explore your own force." But in a real fight, the person who understands this principle has already won, not because they're stronger, but because they're not playing the same game. They practiced for 2 hours, and slowly something shifted. Not mastery, not even real understanding, but a glimpse of something different. A possibility that strength didn't mean what they thought it meant. Grace was the first to laugh suddenly, unexpectedly. "Oh my God, I get it. It's not about the martial art at all, is it? It's about everything. The way we chase success, chase recognition, chase meaning. We're all pushing against doors that would open if we just stopped pushing." "Maybe," Mason said, allowing himself a small smile. Cole was moving differently now, less aggressive, more curious. "When I was fighting you both times, you weren't really there, were you? I mean, physically, yes, but energetically, you were just space." "Where do you punch water?" Mason asked. "Where do you grab air?" The strongest thing is often the thing that offers no resistance. Sloane had tears in her eyes, which seemed to surprise her more than anyone. "I've spent 30 years building walls, armor protection, creating this image of strength that was really just fear dressed up in expensive clothes." "Fear's not the enemy," Mason told her. "Fear's just information. The enemy is what we do with fear." Juliet hadn't spoken for the last hour, just moved, practiced, observed. Now she stood in the center of the room, performing a Tai Chi form she'd done thousands of times. But it looked different, softer, less perfect, but more real. "You could teach this," she said when she finished. "Not the martial art, but this way of seeing." "I am teaching it," Mason replied. "Every day. To my daughter, to anyone who actually watches instead of just looking. You don't need a dojo or students or recognition. You just need to embody what you believe." "But more people could benefit. Could they, or Would turning it into a product, a system, a teaching method, kill exactly what makes it valuable? He began gathering his cleaning supplies. The moment you try to capture water in your hands, it stops being a river. So we just go back to our lives? Cole asked. Pretend this didn't happen. No. You go back to your lives and let it change you. Or don't. That's not my choice to make. Grace approached him as the others were putting their shoes back on. You know I'm going to write about this. I know you're going to try. You can't capture it in words, can you? What you're really teaching. You can capture the shadow of it. Sometimes that's enough to point people toward the light. She smiled. You're more of a philosopher than a fighter. Fighting's just philosophy with immediate consequences. The group dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Sloane left first, moving with a different quality than her usual predatory stride. Cole followed, but not before bowing to Mason properly this time with genuine respect. Grace lingered by the door, always watching her writer's mind trying to frame what couldn't quite be framed. Juliet was the last to go. She stood in front of Mason for a long moment, neither speaking. Finally, she said, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have success, recognition, achievement. And this morning, standing here breathing, was the first time in years I've felt actually alive. That's a beginning, Mason said. Is it, or is it an ending? Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. She left him there with his mop and bucket tools of a trade that everyone understood. But as Mason cleaned the conference room floor, erasing the traces of their practice, he wondered if he'd planted seeds or just disturbed soil that would settle back into old patterns. His phone buzzed. A message from Lila's school. Another incident. This time a group of parents had complained about her presence, saying she was a disruptive influence. The principal wanted to meet. Mason sighed and put away his supplies. The world had a way of intruding, no matter how invisible you tried to become. He changed back into street clothes and headed to PS 47, finding a small crowd of parents already in the principal's office. Mr. Cole, Principal Martinez looked tired. We have some concerns. About a 9-year-old girl. About the attention she's bringing to the school. One parent interrupted a woman with perfectly styled hair and designer workout clothes. My daughter says Lila's been teaching other kids to fight. Teaching them to defend themselves, Lila said from her chair in the corner, chin raised defiantly. Same thing, another parent said. No, Mason said quietly. It's not. He walked over to his daughter, kneeling beside her chair. What have you been teaching them? What you taught me. That strength isn't about hurting people, that the best fight is the one that doesn't happen, but also that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even if it costs you. She taught my son to let bullies push him around, a father said accusingly. I taught him that bullies are just scared kids trying to feel powerful, Lila retorted. And that if you don't give them the reaction they want, they usually just get confused and leave you alone. Mason felt a surge of pride despite the situation. His daughter had been listening, really listening, all these years. Mr. Cole, Principal Martinez said carefully. While we appreciate Lila's philosophy, we're concerned about liability. If she's teaching martial arts techniques on school property, she's teaching confidence, Mason interrupted. She's teaching kids that they have choices besides victim or aggressor. Isn't that what education is supposed to be about? Not when it involves physical techniques that could lead to injury. Show me, Mason said to his daughter. Show them what you've been teaching. Lila stood up, motioning to one of the parents' kids who'd been watching from the doorway. A small boy, maybe 7, with thick glasses and nervous eyes. Come here, Timothy, Lila said gently. The boy looked at his mother, who nodded reluctantly. He approached Lila like she might explode. Remember what we practiced? Lila asked him. About standing. Timothy nodded and adjusted his posture. Not aggressively, just present. Grounded. Now, if someone pushes you, Lila mimed a push without actually touching him. Timothy shifted slightly, letting the imaginary force pass by maintaining his balance. And if they grab you, Timothy demonstrated a simple escape, turning his wrist in a way that would break most grips without violence. That's it, one parent asked. That's what you've been teaching. That and breathing, Lila said. Lots of breathing. Dad says if you can control your breath, you can control your fear. And if you can control your fear, you don't need to fight. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the woman with perfect hair said, "But the videos, the violence." "What violence?" Mason asked. "Show me one moment in any video where I hurt someone. Show me one instance of aggression." They couldn't, of course, because there hadn't been any. "Your daughter is teaching our children to be passive," the accusatory father said. "She's teaching them to be like water," Mason replied, "to flow around obstacles instead of meeting them head on, to be soft when the world expects hard yielding, when it expects resistance. That's not passive. That's the hardest kind of active there is." Principal Martinez rubbed his temples. "Mr. Cole, I understand what you're saying, but the fact remains that other parents are uncomfortable. Perhaps it would be best if Lila took some time off." "You're suspending her for being helpful. I'm suggesting a voluntary leave while things calm down." Mason looked at his daughter, saw the hurt she was trying to hide behind bravery. This was the cost of visibility, the price of being noticed. He'd tried so hard to spare her this. "How long?" "A week, maybe 2. Let the news cycle move on. Let people forget." "People don't forget," Lila said quietly. "They just pretend to." Mason took his daughter's hand. "We'll take the week, but not because we've done anything wrong, because sometimes the wise action is to step back and let others figure out what they've lost." They left the office together, walking through hallways that suddenly seemed hostile. Other kids stared, whispered, some with awe, some with fear, most with the cruel curiosity that children perfected long before adults. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too exposing. Mason and Lila walked to their car in silence, each processing the unfairness in their own way. "I'm sorry," Mason finally said. "For what?" "For bringing this attention to you. For making your life harder." Lila stopped walking, forcing him to stop too. "Dad, those kids I've been teaching Timothy and the others, they used to eat lunch alone, hide during recess. Go home with bruises they wouldn't explain. Now they walk taller. They smile more. They know they're not helpless. How is that something to be sorry for? Because now you're the one being pushed out. But I'm not helpless either. You taught me that." They got in the car, but Mason didn't start the engine immediately. He sat there, hands on the wheel, thinking about cycles and patterns and the way the world resisted change. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "You're right. You're absolutely right. We've been playing by their rules, accepting their terms. Time to change the game." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Mason took out his phone and called Grace Lynn. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." She answered on the second ring. "That story you want to write. Write it, but not about me. About them. About the kids who are learning to stand up without standing out. About the parents so afraid of strength they mistake it for violence. About a system that prefers victims and bullies to people who refuse to be either. You're ready to go public." "No, but my daughter is, and she's braver than I am." He hung up and looked at Lila. "You sure about this?" "Once the story's out there, really out there, we can't take it back." "Mom would do it," Lila said simply. "If she saw kids being helped and adults trying to stop it, she'd fight. Not with fists, but with truth." Mason started the car, but instead of going home, he drove to the Meridian building. If they were going to do this, they were going to do it right. He found Juliet in the basement of all places, standing outside the janitor's break room like she was waiting for permission to enter. "I came to find you," she said when she saw him, "to apologize for this morning, for pushing, for trying to make you into something you're not." "I need your help," Mason said, which clearly wasn't what she'd expected. "Anything. Not for me, for my daughter, and for some kids who are being punished for learning to be strong." He explained the situation while Lila waited in the car. Juliet listened without interrupting her expression, cycling through surprise, anger, and finally determination. "Give me an hour," she said when he finished. "I'll make some calls." "I don't want your money or your influence." "No, but you need a platform, and I need a chance to do something real instead of just profitable." She paused. "That school PS 47, they're about to receive a donation for a new after-school program, self-defense and confidence building, properly insured, professionally taught, And they're going to accept it because the alternative is a discrimination lawsuit for suspending students who were helping others. You can't just, I can and I will. You taught me something this morning. That real strength comes from creating space for others to find their own power. Let me create that space. Mason studied her for a long moment, then nodded. One condition. Lila helps design the program. The kids teach the kids with adult supervision. No experts, no masters, just young people helping each other find their balance. Deal. They shook hands and Mason felt something shift in the air between them. Not romantic, not even friendship exactly, but recognition. Two people who'd found different ways to the same truth. He returned to the car to find Lila doing homework in the back seat, using her suspension productively. So, she asked, so we're going to teach them that water can carve canyons given enough time. That's a metaphor, right? Everything's a metaphor if you look at it right. They drove home through the afternoon traffic and Mason noticed something different. The weight he'd been carrying since that night on the rooftop felt lighter. Not gone, but transformed into something else. Purpose, maybe. Or just acceptance that invisibility was its own kind of illusion, that we all affected the world whether we meant to or not. Back at their apartment, Mrs. Chen was waiting with the pot of soup and knowing eyes. You look different, she told Mason. Less hiding, more being. Is that good? Is rain good? Is sun good? Things just are. Good and bad are stories we tell after. She left the soup and disappeared into her apartment, but her words lingered. Mason served the soup while Lila set the table, their routine intact despite the chaos around it. Dad? Lila said between spoonfuls, those people this morning, the ones you taught, they looked at you like you were magic. People see what they need to see. But you showed them something real. I showed them themselves. That's all teaching ever is, holding up a mirror at the right angle. Lila considered this. Is that why you don't want to be famous? Because people would look at the mirror instead of what it's reflecting? Mason reached across the table to ruffle her hair. When did you get so insightful Friday? I thought it was Tuesday. That was wisdom. Insight is Friday. They laughed together, and for a moment the apartment felt exactly as it should. Small, warm, complete. A fortress made not of walls, but of understanding. Mason's phone rang. Grace Lynn again. I've been investigating, she said without preamble. The parents who complained about Lila, 3 of them, have kids in a competing martial arts program. One that charges $200 a month and promises to make kids warriors. They see what Lila's doing as a threat to their investment. Of course they do. I'm going to expose it. The whole thing. The way they're using fear and money to control what children learn, how they learn to be strong. It's going to be Big Mason. Just keep Lila safe in the story. She's 9 years old. She'll come out looking like the hero she is. That I promise. After dinner, as Lila did her homework and Mason cleaned the dishes, he thought about the strange turns life took. A week ago, he'd been invisible, safe in his routines and limitations. Now the world was pressing in from all sides, demanding he be something more than just a janitor who knew how to move like water. But maybe that was the point. Maybe safety was its own kind of prison, and being seen, really seen, was the price of making a difference. His phone buzzed with a text from Cole. Practiced what you taught today. Felt like an idiot, then felt like I was floating, then felt like an idiot again. Progress? Mason typed back, perfect progress. Another text, this one from Sloan. I quit my job. Not fired, quit. Going to teach yoga to kids in the Bronx. Terrible pay. Never been happier. And one from Juliet. Program approved by the school board. Starts Monday. Lila is lead student instructor. You've changed things whether you meant to or not. Mason put the phone away and went to check on his daughter. She was asleep over her homework pencils still in hand, math problems half finished. He carried her to her room, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. Everything he'd done, every choice he'd made since her mother died, had been about protecting this peace, this innocence, this chance for her to grow up unburdened by the weight of what he'd been. But maybe protection wasn't about hiding. Maybe it was about showing her that strength could be gentle, that power could be kind, that the hardest thing in the world was to remain soft in a world that rewarded hardness. He returned to the living room and stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Timothy was standing taller. Somewhere Cole was learning to yield. Somewhere Juliet was discovering that success without service was just elaborate failure. Small changes, tiny victories. Drops of water that might given time carve new channels through old stone. Mason's reflection in the window looked back at him transparent and solid at once. Like water, he thought. Visible when it needed to be invisible, when it didn't always exactly what the moment required. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The article would be published, the program would start, the world would continue its relentless spin. But tonight, in this small apartment above the greatest city in the world, a father and daughter had found their balance. And that Mason knew was the only victory that really mattered. The article dropped at 6 in the morning on a Monday that felt heavier than most Mondays had a right to feel. Grace Lynn had titled it, "The Invisible Warriors: How Children Are Teaching Each Other to Stand Without Fighting." And within an hour, it was trending across every platform that mattered. Mason read it while Lila slept, his coffee growing cold as he absorbed Grace's carefully crafted narrative that somehow told the truth without exposing too much of it. She'd been clever, focusing on the children rather than him, making Lila a symbol rather than a target. The piece described young students at PS 47 discovering their own strength through simple movements and breathing exercises taught not by adults trying to monetize their fears, but by peers who understood what it meant to be small in a world built for the big. By the time Lila woke up, their apartment building was surrounded again, but this time the crowd was different. Parents with their children holding handmade signs that said things like, "Let them learn," and "Strength through peace." Mrs. Chen stood on the steps like a general surveying troops coordinating with the building's security to maintain order. "Dad," Lila said, peering out the window at the crowd. "They're here for me. They're here for what you represent. There's a difference." Is there, or is that just something we tell ourselves to make it less scary? Mason had no good answer for that, so he made breakfast instead, maintaining their routine in defiance of the chaos outside. But when they tried to leave for the school where the new program would begin, they found the lobby packed with reporters, parents, and curious onlookers. "Mr. Cole, is it true you're starting a revolution in children's self-defense?" "Lila, how does it feel to be called the youngest master instructor in New York? Will you be teaching adults as well?" Mason was preparing to push through when Juliet appeared, flanked by building security, creating a pathway. She'd traded her usual white for simple black athletic wear, looking more like an instructor than a CEO. "The car's waiting out back, but," she told Mason quietly, "unless you want to make a statement." "The only statement I make is with actions," Mason replied, guiding Lila through the gap she'd created. In the car, a black SUV with tinted windows that Juliet had arranged, Lila sat between them, unusually quiet. "You okay, sweetheart?" Mason asked. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't teach them what you taught me?" "Then you'll learn together," Juliet said before Mason could answer. "The best teachers are the ones who remember what it's like not to know." They arrived at PS 47 to find the gymnasium transformed. The usual scuffed floors had been covered with professional mats, and parents lined the walls, some supportive, others skeptical, all watching. Principal Martinez stood near the entrance looking like a man who'd lost control of his own school and wasn't entirely unhappy about it. "We have 43 students registered," he told Mason, "ages 6 to 12. Some of their parents are resistant." "They're welcome to watch," Mason said. "Fear dissolves better in light than in shadow." The children were already gathering in the center of the gym, some in martial arts uniforms they'd clearly bought for the occasion, others in simple gym clothes. Timothy was there, standing slightly taller than Mason remembered, and around him clustered the other kids Lila had been quietly teaching during lunch breaks and recess. Cole Barrett entered from the side door, causing a stir among the parents who recognized him. But he wasn't there as the celebrity trainer anymore. He walked directly to Mason and bowed properly, humbly. "I'd like to help," he said simply. "Not teach, just help. Carry mats, demonstrate if needed, whatever you need." "Why?" Mason asked. "Because I spent 10 years learning to fight and never learned to stop fighting until you showed me. Maybe these kids can skip the first part." Sloane Whitman entered next, her transformation even more dramatic. Gone was every trace of the corporate shark. She looked younger, softer, though her eyes still held that sharp intelligence. "I brought insurance papers," she said, producing a folder. Liability waivers, medical clearances, everything the school board requires. All pro bono. You're a lawyer now, Juliet asked, surprised. Always was. The corporate strategy thing was just better paying, but it turns out doing the right thing for free feels better than doing the wrong thing for millions. But Mason looked at these people who'd been strangers a week ago, enemies days ago, and were now something else entirely. Not friends exactly, but fellow travelers on a path none of them fully understood. All right, he said to Lila. It's your class. How do you want to begin? Lila walked to the center of the mat, and the room gradually quieted. She looked so small standing there, but her voice carried clearly when she spoke. My dad taught me that the strongest water is the kind that knows when to be ice, when to be liquid, and when to be vapor. Today we're going to learn to be like water. She had them sit in a circle, not in rows like a traditional class. No hierarchy, no front or back, just a community of learners. First we breathe, she said, and began leading them through the exercise Mason had taught her years ago when her mother was dying and the world felt too heavy for a 6-year-old to bear. Some parents shifted restlessly, expecting something more dramatic, more obviously martial. But Mason watched their children and saw what the adults were missing. The way tension dissolved from small shoulders, the way fists unclenched, the way fear began to transform into curiosity. Now, Lila said after several minutes, everyone stand and find a partner, someone you don't usually talk to. The children mixed reluctantly, at first popular kids with unpopular ones, athletes with artists, the loud with the quiet. Timothy ended up paired with a girl named Sarah, who'd been one of his tormentors before Lila's teachings had begun to change the school's dynamics. We're going to practice being mountains and wind, Lila explained. One person stands strong like a mountain, the other moves around them like wind. The mountain learns to be still, the wind learns to flow. Then we switch. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No combat techniques, no aggressive stances, just children learning to inhabit space differently. Mason saw parents beginning to understand their skepticism, softening into something like wonder. But not everyone was convinced. This is ridiculous, a father near the back muttered loud enough to be heard. When is she going to teach them to actually defend themselves? His son, a boy named Marcus, who wore an expensive martial arts uniform, raised his hand. I already know how to fight. I've been taking karate for 3 years. Then you can help demonstrate, Lila said without missing a beat. Would you like to show everyone what you've learned? Marcus strutted to the center, clearly pleased to be singled out. He dropped into an aggressive stance, fists raised. Attack me, he said to Lila. Why? She asked. To show them my defense. But I don't want to attack you. I don't want to attack anyone. Then how can I show them what I know? Maybe, Lila said gently, what you know only works if someone else does something first. What happens if no one attacks? Marcus looked confused, his stance wavering. But that's the whole point. Someone attacks, you defend. Or, Lila suggested, no one attacks and no one needs to defend and we all go home safe. That's naive, Marcus's father called out. The world doesn't work that way. Mason stepped forward, then not to the center, but just enough to be seen. You're right, he said to the father. The world doesn't work that way. But maybe that's because we keep teaching our children that it can't. Easy for you to say. You're some kind of master fighter. You can afford to be peaceful. Can I? Mason moved to the center, standing beside his daughter. Marcus, attack me. The boy looked at his father, who nodded encouragement. Marcus launched himself forward with a yell, throwing the punch he'd been taught would disable an opponent. Mason didn't move away. He moved through his body, becoming space that Marcus's punch passed through without connection. The boy stumbled forward, and Mason's hand was there to steady him, gentle as a friend's support. Again, Mason said. Marcus attacked again, this time with a combination he'd won tournaments with. Each strike found only Air Mason's movement so minimal it looked like he was barely doing anything at all. But Marcus might as well have been fighting smoke. Why can't I hit you? Marcus asked, frustrated. Because you're trying to, Mason replied. Try not to hit me. That doesn't make sense. Try it. Marcus approached more slowly this time, his fist extending without real intention to connect. Mason didn't move at all, and the punch stopped inches from his chest, Marcus's own body naturally preventing the strike from landing. When you try to hit, Mason explained to the watching children, your body telegraphs intention. When you don't try, there's nothing to read, nothing to avoid. The most dangerous person is the one who doesn't want to fight. But then how do you win? Marcus asked. You don't, Leela said, taking over again. You just don't lose, and if no one loses, doesn't everyone win? She had Marcus practice the mountain and wind exercise with Timothy, and something beautiful happened. The boy who'd been so eager to show his fighting skills began to understand that real strength might look different than he'd imagined. The class continued for an hour with Lila leading exercises that looked nothing like traditional martial arts but contained all the principles Mason had taught her. Balance awareness, breath flow. Cole and Juliet moved among the students, helping adjusting learning alongside them. Even Sloane, who'd probably never been on a gym mat in her life, was working with a group of the youngest children, teaching them to fall safely by pretending to be leaves floating from trees. Grace Lynn stood in the corner taking notes, but not photos, respecting the space while documenting what she was seeing. Occasionally she caught Mason's eye, and he saw she understood what was really happening here. Not a martial arts class, but a fundamental reimagining of what strength could mean. Halfway through the session, 3 men entered the gym. They wore matching jackets from Warrior Kids Academy, the competing program Grace had mentioned. The lead instructor, a muscled man named Derek, who Mason recognized from local MMA circuits, walked directly to Principal Martinez. "This is illegal," Derek announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They're teaching martial arts without proper certification. My program is the only licensed youth combat training in this district." "They're not teaching combat," Principal Martinez replied calmly. "They're teaching movement and breathing exercises." "I saw the video. That man," he pointed at Mason, "is teaching fighting techniques." "I'm teaching children to stand still," Mason said mildly. "If that threatens your program, maybe you should examine what you're really selling." Derek's face reddened. "You think you're better than us with your mystical nonsense and feel-good philosophy?" "I think I'm a janitor who's helping his daughter share something that's helped her, nothing more." "Prove it." The gym fell silent. Every eye turned to the confrontation brewing between the 2 men. "Prove what?" Mason asked. "That your way works. Fight me. Show these kids and parents what real application looks like." "No." "Coward." Lila started to step forward, but Mason put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "There's nothing cowardly about refusing to dance to someone else's music," he told her loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're just afraid," Derek pressed. "All this talk about not fighting is just cover for not being able to fight." "Maybe," Mason agreed easily, "or maybe fighting you would teach these children that violence is the answer to disagreement, that strength means domination, that winning requires someone else to lose. Those are facts of life. No, they're choices we've agreed to pretend are facts." Derek stepped onto the mat. "I'm not leaving until you face me. These parents deserve to know who they're trusting with their children's safety." Mason sighed and looked at the assembled crowd. Parents' worried children confused his daughter, watching him with absolute trust. He thought about his wife, what she would say in this moment. She'd always been the wiser one, the one who could find the third option when everyone else saw only 2. "All right," Mason said finally, "but not a fight, a demonstration. You attack however you want. I'll show these children what we're really teaching here." Derek smiled triumphantly and immediately dropped into his fighting stance. He was younger than Mason, stronger in the obvious ways, trained in systems designed to hurt and dominate. He came in fast with a takedown attempt that had won him regional championships. Mason became water, not the dramatic flowing movements people expected from Tai Chi. Just a subtle shift in density, a change in presence that made Derek's aggressive forward momentum feel like trying to tackle a river. The younger man passed through the space where Mason had been, where Mason somehow still was, but wasn't, and found himself gently guided to the mat. Mason's hand on his shoulder, ensuring he landed safely. Derek jumped up embarrassed and threw a combination of strikes that would have hospitalized most people. Mason moved like mist, like the space between heartbeats, each attack finding nothing but the memory of where he'd been. But more than that, each miss seemed to teach Derek something, show him the futility of his aggression, the exhaustion of constant offense. After 2 minutes, Derek was breathing hard, sweating through his jacket. Mason hadn't thrown a single strike, hadn't even raised his hands in a traditional guard. He'd simply existed in a way that made violence impossible. Why? Derek gasped, bent over, hands on his knees. Why won't you fight back? Because you're not my enemy, Mason said, echoing what he'd told Cole days ago. You're a teacher who cares about children learning to protect themselves. We just disagree on what protection looks like. But in the real world, most fights can be avoided by not being where fights happen, by reading situations before they escalate, by understanding that ego is the enemy, not other people. Mason turned to address the parents. I can't promise your children will win fights. I can promise they'll learn to avoid most of them. They'll learn that real strength is the ability to help others up, not knock them down. They'll learn that the scariest person in the room is often the calmest one. Derek stood up slowly, his aggression spent. You could have destroyed me. Could I, or would destroying you have destroyed something in these children? The belief that conflict doesn't require conquest. Derek looked at the watching kids, saw their faces, the way they were processing what they'd witnessed. No cheering for violence, no excitement at domination, just thoughtful observation of something more complex than winning and losing. Your way, Derek said quietly. Does it really work? In real situations. Instead of answering, Mason called Timothy forward. This young man was being bullied. Daily. Physical confrontations he couldn't win. Lila taught him our way. Timothy, tell Mr. Derek what happened. Timothy adjusted his glasses nervously but spoke clearly. The bullies got confused when I didn't react the way they expected. When they pushed, I yielded. When they tried to make me angry, I stayed calm. After a few days, they just stopped. It wasn't fun anymore. And if they hadn't stopped, Derek asked, then I would have had to make a choice, Timothy said. But because I stayed calm, I would have made it from thought, not fear. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He bowed to Mason properly with genuine respect. I'd like to observe the rest of the class, he said, if that's acceptable. Everyone's welcome to learn, Lila said before Mason could respond. That's the whole point. The session continued with Derek watching from the side, occasionally nodding, sometimes frowning, always thinking. Other parents had their phones out recording not for scandal, but for sharing, spreading the image of children learning to be strong without being hard. Near the end of the hour, Lila had all the children stand in a large circle holding hands. The last exercise is about connection, she explained. When we're connected, we're all stronger. One person starts a squeeze, she demonstrated with Timothy on her right, and it travels around the circle. See how fast we can make it go. It was a simple children's game, but Mason saw the deeper teaching. Unity communication, the understanding that we're all part of something larger. The squeeze flew around the circle, children laughing as they tried to make it faster, and for a moment the gym felt like what it should be, a place of joy and learning, not competition and fear. When the class ended, parents approached Mason and Lila with questions. Gratitude, some still with skepticism. But the children were different. They moved differently, stood differently, looked at each other differently. Marcus approached Lila shyly. Could you teach me that thing about being water? We all learn together, Lila replied. Next week? Next week. As the gym emptied, Derek lingered. When most everyone had gone, he approached Mason. I run a business, he said. 3 locations, 40 instructors, almost 1,000 students. We teach them to fight because parents pay for their kids to feel powerful. I know. But what you're teaching, it's what they actually need, isn't it? What I'm teaching is one path. Your way is another. The world probably needs both. No, Derek said firmly. It doesn't. It needs more of this and less of what I've been selling. He pulled out a business card. I'm going to talk to my instructors, see if any of them are interested in learning your approach. Would you consider teaching teachers? Mason looked at the card, then at Juliet, who'd been listening nearby. I know someone who might be interested in that arrangement, he said, nodding toward her. Juliet stepped forward, and Mason saw the CEO in her wake up. We could create a certification program, not commercialized but structured. Teachers teaching teachers, spreading the philosophy without diluting it. Derek and Juliet began discussing possibilities, and Mason stepped away, finding Lila sitting on the edge of the mat, exhausted but glowing. "You did good, sweetheart. I was terrified the whole time. But you did it anyway. That's all courage is." Grace Lynn approached them, her notebook full. "This is becoming something bigger than any of us expected." "Most important things do," Mason replied. "What happens now?" Mason looked around the gym at Cole, helping to stack mats at Sloan, explaining liability laws to concerned parents at Juliet and Derek, planning something that might change how thousands of children learn to be strong. "Now we go home," he told Grace. "Have dinner, do homework, live our lives. That's it. That's everything." They left through the main entrance this time, no hiding, no sneaking. The afternoon sun felt warm and welcoming, and the walk to their car was peaceful. Some people recognized them, pointed, took pictures, but Mason no longer felt the need to hide from the attention. It was just another force to flow around another current in the river of life. In the car, Lila fell asleep almost immediately, the emotional exhaustion of teaching finally catching up with her. Mason drove carefully, protectively, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 week. His phone buzzed at a red light. A text from Tom, his old army buddy. "Saw the news. Proud of you, brother. Your wife would be too." Mason typed back, "She always was the smarter one." "She was, but she chose you for a reason." They arrived home to find Mrs. Chen had organized the neighbors into a kind of protective committee. Mr. Rodriguez from 2C was checking IDs at the door. Ms. Washington from 3A had set up a coffee station in the lobby for the parents who'd come to show support. The building that had just been a place to live had become something else, a community united around protecting one of their own. "You've started something," Mrs. Chen told Mason. "Lila started it. I just didn't stop her." Same thing sometimes. That evening, as they ate dinner, Mrs. Chen's dumplings delivered with a wink and a refusal to accept payment, Mason watched his daughter process the day. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "What we started. Nothing lasts forever, but sometimes things last long enough." "Long enough for what?" "To matter." Lila considered this, then asked, "Do you miss being invisible?" Mason thought about the question seriously. "I miss the simplicity of it, but invisibility was just another kind of hiding. Your mom always said I was too good at disappearing when things got complicated. But you're not disappearing now." "No. Now I'm trying to be like water in a different way, visible when it needs to be invisible when it doesn't." That sounds harder than just being one or the other. Most real things are. After Lila went to bed, Mason stood at his usual spot by the window, but this time Juliet was there, having stayed to discuss the program with him. "We could make this nationwide," she said. "Derek has connections, I have resources, Grace could document it. Real change, not just corporate wellness packaging." "The moment it becomes big, it becomes something else," Mason warned. "Water in a cup is still water. Water in an ocean is power that can destroy or create." "Then we keep it small." Cells of teachers, each maintaining the integrity of the practice. No franchising, no scaling, just spreading. Like ripples. Exactly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Juliet said, "You know, a week ago I thought I knew what strength was. Success, achievement, dominance in my field. And now? Now I think strength might be a 9-year-old girl teaching other children not to be afraid. And her father, who could be anything, choosing to be exactly what she needs." She left soon after, and Mason was alone with the night and his thoughts. The city hummed outside, millions of lives intersecting and separating, each carrying their own struggles and secrets. He'd been thrust into visibility, forced to abandon the comfortable invisibility he'd wrapped himself in like armor. But watching his daughter teach, seeing children learn that strength didn't require hardness, witnessing adults question assumptions they'd never thought to examine, maybe this was worth the exposure. Maybe his wife would have wanted this, not the hiding, but the healing. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code. Military. "Mason Cole." "Yes." "This is General Morrison. We served together in Afghanistan, though you might not remember me." Mason remembered. Morrison had been a colonel, then one of the few officers who understood that sometimes the best military action was no action at all. I remember, sir. I've been watching what you're doing, teaching children, spreading a philosophy of strength without aggression. We need that in our veterans programs. Would you consider consulting not as a fighter, but as someone who understands the transition from warrior to civilian? I'm just a janitor, sir. No, you're a man who chose to become a janitor, rather than let his skills define him. That's exactly the wisdom our veterans need. Mason considered it. Another expansion, another complication, but also another chance to help to heal, to transform what he'd learned in war into something useful in peace. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. The offer stands. After the call ended, Mason checked on Lila one more time. She was sleeping peacefully, one hand tucked under her pillow, the other holding the photo of her mother he'd given her years ago. Everything he'd done since her mother's death had been about protecting this innocence, this peace, this chance for her to grow up whole in a broken world. But today she'd protected others, taught them, led them toward their own wholeness. The student had become the teacher, and the teacher had learned that protection sometimes meant stepping into the light, not away from it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The program would grow or fade. Critics would emerge, supporters would have their own agendas. The water would continue to flow, finding its level, carving new channels through old stone. But tonight, in their small apartment above the great city, a father stood guard over his daughter's dreams, and that was enough. That was everything. The ripples they'd created would spread or dissipate according to their own nature. All Mason could do was what he'd always done, be like water adapting to each moment. Neither grasping nor pushing away, simply flowing toward whatever shape the world needed him to take. And if that shape was no longer invisible, if it required him to stand in the light and be seen, then that too was part of the practice, part of the teaching, part of the endless journey from who we were to who we might become. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm Mason hadn't expected, like water finding its way through new channels carved by necessity rather than design. The program at PS 47 had grown from 43 students to over 200, requiring multiple sessions throughout the week. Lila taught the youngest ones on Mondays. Timothy had started leading a group for his peers on Wednesdays, and even Marcus, the boy who'd been so eager to show his fighting skills, now helped demonstrate the art of yielding on Fridays. But success, Mason had learned long ago, always came with shadows. The call came on a Tuesday morning while he was mopping the lobby of the Meridian building. His supervisor's voice was carefully neutral, the tone of someone delivering news they'd rather not share. "Corporate says you need to take a leave of absence," the man said. "Paid full benefits, nothing negative in your file. But they think the attention you're getting is disruptive to building operations." Mason continued mopping the familiar motion, a meditation against the rising tide of complication. How long? Indefinitely, until things calm down. Things don't calm down, they just move on to the next crisis. "I'm sorry, Mason. I fought for you, but the decision came from above my pay grade." After the call ended, Mason finished mopping the lobby with the same careful attention he'd brought to the job for 3 years. Each stroke was complete, each section thoroughly cleaned. If this was to be his last shift, he'd end it the way he'd begun, with simple dedication to the task at hand. Juliet found him in the basement organizing his supplies for whoever would take over. "I heard," she said. "I tried to stop it, but the board overruled me." "It's all right. Water always finds its level." "This isn't right. You've done nothing but help people." "Sometimes helping people is the most disruptive thing you can do." She watched him label cleaning solutions, arrange mops by size, create order out of chaos one last time. "What will you do?" "What I've always done. Take care of my daughter, live simply, move through the world without making waves." "But you are making waves, important ones." Mason turned to face her, seeing the genuine distress in her eyes. "Every action has consequences, Juliet. I knew this would happen eventually. The visible can't remain invisible, no matter how much they might want to. I could hire you, officially, as a consultant for Harmony Dynamics. To do what? To teach what you teach. To be who you are. I can do that without a title or salary. But how will you live, pay rent, take care of Lila?" Mason smiled slightly. "The same way most people do, one day at a time with whatever work comes." He left the building through the service entrance, for the last time, his supervisor waiting there with an envelope. "Severance," the man explained. 6 months. It was the best I could negotiate. Thank you. Mason, what you did, what your daughter's doing, my grandson's in the program. He's different now, calmer, stronger, not afraid of his own shadow anymore. That's Lila's doing, not mine. Maybe. But you taught her. That matters. Mason walked home through streets that had become familiar as breathing past the bodega where Mr. Kim always saved the good apples for Lila, past the small park where he'd taught her to ride a bike, past all the markers of a life built carefully from the ruins of loss. He found General Morrison waiting outside his apartment building, not in uniform, but still carrying himself with military precision. "Walk with me," the general said, and they headed toward the river, two veterans moving through civilian space with the particular awareness of those who'd seen how quickly peace could shatter. "I need your help," Morrison said when they reached the water, not as a fighter, but as someone who found a way back. Back from what? From what we became over there, from what we had to be. They stood watching the river flow its surface, reflecting the city's endless motion. "I have a son," Morrison continued. 25 years old, 3 tours in Syria, came back intact on the outside but broken somewhere I can't reach. He won't talk to therapists, won't take medication, won't admit anything's wrong, but he watched your videos, all of them, over and over. And he said something yesterday, first real thing he's said in months. He said, that janitor gets it. The way violence lives in your body even when the war's over. Mason was quiet, remembering his own return, the months of starting at shadows, of feeling his training coiled inside him like a spring that wouldn't release. "What do you want from me?" Talk to him. Just talk. Not as a therapist or counselor, just as someone who understands. "I can't fix him." "I'm not asking you to fix him. I'm asking you to show him that broken doesn't mean worthless." They arranged to meet the next day, and Morrison left Mason standing by the river watching the water that never stopped moving, yet somehow always remained itself. When he got home, Lila was already there, having walked herself back from school. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Timothy and Sarah, the girl who'd once bullied him, now working together on a presentation about conflict resolution. "Dad, we're going to present at the school board meeting," Lila announced, "about making the program official curriculum." "That's ambitious." Sarah's mom is on the board. She said if we can show real results, real change, they'll consider it. Mason looked at Sarah, who 6 weeks ago had been one of the problems and was now part of the solution. "What changed your mind?" he asked her. "Timothy did," she said simply. "When I pushed him, and he didn't push back when I tried to make him angry, and he stayed calm, it was like looking in a mirror and not liking what I saw. That takes courage to admit. Lila says courage is just fear that's learned to breathe properly." "She's smart," Mason said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "I have a smart dad." That evening, while the children worked on their presentation, Mason met Cole at a small gym in Queens. The young trainer had been transforming his entire approach, teaching his clients to work with their bodies rather than against them to find strength in softness. "I'm losing followers," Cole admitted, as they sat on the edge of the boxing ring. "Down 3 million in the last month. Turns out people prefer the fantasy of dominance to the reality of balance." "Do you regret it?" "Every time I check my bank balance." Cole laughed, but there was freedom in it. "Then I remember what it felt like to always be performing, always be on, always be afraid someone would see through the image. Now I'm just me. Smaller audience, smaller income, but bigger life. That's the trade-off most people aren't willing to make." When you chose to become invisible?" Mason considered the question. "I didn't choose it at first. It chose me. Grief has a way of erasing you, making you transparent. I just decided not to fight it. And now I'm learning there might be something between invisible and exposed. Something like translucent visible when the light hits, right transparent when it doesn't." They were interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the gym windows, they could see a group of young men circling someone, the universal body language of violence about to explode. Cole started to move, but Mason put a hand on his arm. "Watch first, act second." The person being circled was a teenager, maybe 16, clutching a backpack like it contained his entire world. The aggressors were older, bigger, radiating the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having consequences. "We should help," Cole insisted. "We should. but how we help matters. Mason walked out of the gym, not rushing, not aggressive, just present. He approached the group like water approaching stones, inevitable, but gentle. "Evening," he said conversationally. "You guys know where the nearest subway entrance is. I always get turned around in Queens." The lead aggressor, a young man with neck tattoos and anger issues, turned to him. "Back off, old man. This isn't your business." "You're right," Mason agreed easily. "But I really do need directions, and you look like someone who knows the neighborhood." It was such an unexpected response that the aggressive energy faltered for a moment. The teenager with the backpack used that moment to step backward, creating space. "Are you stupid, mushy?" Neck tattoos asked. "We're in the middle of something here." "I can see that, but I find that most things in the middle can choose their ending." Cole had emerged from the gym now along with several other trainers who'd heard the commotion. The mathematics of the situation shifted. The aggressors were no longer surrounding one victim, but were themselves surrounded by witnesses. "This ain't over." Neck tattoos told the teenager, but the heat had gone out of it. They walked away trying to maintain swagger, but really just retreating. The teenager stood there, shaking adrenaline, making his whole body vibrate. "You okay?" Mason asked. "They wanted my shoes, limited edition worth like $500. The kid looked down at his feet like they'd betrayed him. "I saved for 6 months. Must be special shoes." "They were, until right now. Now they're just expensive problems." Mason saw the moment of realization, the understanding that sometimes what we value becomes what makes us vulnerable. "You could have fought them," the teenager said. "I saw the videos. You're that janitor guy." "I could have. Then what?" "They'd have left me alone. Today. But tomorrow they'd come back with friends, or weapons, or they'd find you when no one's around to help. Violence doesn't end things. It just changes their shape." The teenager considered this, then looked at his shoes again. "So what do I do?" "You choose what matters more, the shoes or the safety, the image or the peace." "That's not fair." "No," Mason agreed. "It's not." They watched the teenager walk away, steps a little less certain than before, but perhaps a little wiser. Cole stood beside Mason, processing what he'd witnessed. "You didn't save him. I gave him time to save himself. There's a difference. What if they'd attacked anyway? Then we would have responded appropriately. But most aggression is performance. Take away the audience, change the script, and the show usually ends." They walked back to the gym where a small crowd had gathered phones out, having recorded the entire interaction. "Great," Cole muttered. "More viral content." But when Mason checked his phone later, the videos weren't about him. They were about the teenager who'd posted his own perspective. Sometimes the bravest thing is admitting you're scared. Sometimes the smartest thing is choosing peace over pride. The next morning, Mason met Morrison's son at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Jake Morrison looked like a younger version of his father, but where the general carried his military bearing like armor, Jake seemed to be drowning in his. "My dad thinks you can fix me," Jake said without preamble. "Your dad's wrong. I can't fix anyone." "Then why are you here?" "Because sometimes the only thing worse than being broken is being broken alone." Jake stared at his coffee, untouched and growing cold. "You know what it's like having skills that only matter in places you never want to go back to. I know what it's like to be very good at something the world is better off without." "But you found a way to use it. The videos teaching kids." "I found a way to transform it. There's a difference. The skills are the same, but the intention changes everything." "How?" Mason thought about how to explain something that had taken him years to understand. "You know how to clear a room, right? Tactical entry threat assessment, controlled violence." "Yeah. I know how to clear a floor with a mop, same systematic approach, same attention to detail, same complete focus. The skill set transfers, you just have to find the right translation." Jake looked at him for the first time, really looked. "You're serious?" "Completely. Every military skill has a civilian application. The hypervigilance that's keeping you awake makes you a great security consultant. The ability to assess threats, valuable in risk management. The tactical thinking business strategy. You don't have to abandon what you are, you just have to point it in a different direction." "It's not that simple." "No. Mason agreed. It's not. It's actually harder than combat because there's no clear enemy, no defined mission, no extraction point. You have to create your own structure, your own purpose, your own reason to keep moving forward. So how do you do it? One day at a time, one breath at a time, one choice at a time. And when that's too much, 1 second at a time. They talked for 2 hours, not about solutions, but about the reality of carrying violence in your muscle memory, of seeing threats in shadows, of the strange grief that came from losing a purpose you never wanted but couldn't quite release. When Jake finally left, he shook Mason's hand with something that might have been hope, or might have just been recognition, the acknowledgement of one warrior by another, both trying to find peace in a world that had trained them for war. That afternoon, Mason arrived at PS 47 to find chaos. The school board meeting had been moved up, and protesters had gathered outside. Not many, but enough to make noise. They carried signs saying things like, "Keep violence out of our schools," and "Fighting is not education." Derek from the Warrior Kids Academy was there, but not with the protesters. He stood with a group of his instructors, all wearing new t-shirts that said, "Strength through peace." "We're converting all our programs," he told Mason. "It's been a disaster financially, but a revelation personally. These kids don't need to learn to fight. They need to learn to be." "That's a big change." "You changed first. You showed it was possible." Inside the school, the board meeting was already in session. Lila, Timothy, and Sarah sat at a table facing 5 board members who looked skeptical at best, hostile at worst. "Violence in any form has no place in our schools," one board member was saying. "But we're not teaching violence," Lila responded calmly. "We're teaching the opposite of violence. You're teaching martial arts. We're teaching movement. We're teaching breathing. We're teaching how to not fight." Sarah stood up, surprising everyone. 6 weeks ago, I was a bully. I pushed kids like Timothy because it made me feel powerful. Then I learned that real power isn't about pushing others down. It's about lifting them up. The program didn't teach me to fight. It taught me why not to. Timothy stood next. "I used to be afraid all the time. Afraid of kids like Sarah, afraid of walking to school, afraid of being weak. Now I'm not afraid because I understand that strength isn't about being able to hurt people. It's about being able to help them." The board members exchanged glances, their skepticism wavering. "But what about liability?" one asked. "What about injuries?" Sloan Whitman entered from the back of the room carrying a thick folder. "I've reviewed 6 weeks of program data. 0 injuries, 0 altercations. But more importantly, disciplinary actions among participating students are down 60%. Attendance is up 20%. Academic performance has improved across the board." "Who are you?" "I'm the pro bono legal counsel for the program. I'm also someone who spent 30 years thinking conflict was about winning until these children taught me it's about understanding." The lead board member, a woman named Patricia Hernandez, looked directly at Mason. "Mr. Cole, you've been silent. What do you have to say?" Mason stood slowly, feeling the weight of attention, but no longer flinching from it. "I've spent my adult life learning to hurt people efficiently. It was deemed necessary, even noble. I was decorated for it, celebrated for it, but it never made anything better. It just made things end." He paused, looking at his daughter, drawing strength from her steady gaze. These children are learning something different. They're learning that every conflict is an opportunity for connection, that every aggressor is a person in pain, that true strength is the ability to remain soft in a world that rewards hardness. You ask about liability. The real liability is raising another generation that thinks violence is the answer to disagreement. "But the protesters," one board member began, "are afraid," Mason interrupted gently, "afraid that their children will be hurt, afraid that teaching anything combat adjacent normalizes violence. I understand that fear. I live with it every day. But hiding from the reality of conflict doesn't make it go away. It just ensures our children face it unprepared." Principal Martinez stood up. "If I may, I've been an educator for 23 years. I've seen countless anti-bullying programs, conflict resolution workshops, peer mediation attempts. Most failed because they were theoretical abstract. This program works because it's physical. It teaches through the body what the mind alone can't grasp. It makes philosophy tangible." The board members huddled, discussing in whispers. The room held its breath. Finally, Patricia Hernandez spoke. We'll approve a pilot program. 1 semester closely monitored with monthly reviews. Any incident of violence and it ends immediately. Lila jumped up, then caught herself bowing formally instead. Thank you. You won't regret this. I hope not, Patricia replied, but she was smiling slightly. As the meeting dispersed, Mason found himself surrounded by parents, some supportive, others still skeptical. One mother pushed through the crowd, her face tight with anger. My son came home saying he learned to yield today, to give up, to be weak. That's not what I want him learning. What do you want him learning, Tess? Mason asked. To stand up for himself, to be strong. And if I told you that yielding requires more strength than resisting, that giving way at the right moment can redirect an opponent's force back at them, that water yields to everything and overcomes everything? I'd say that sounds like fortune cookie wisdom. Her son, a boy about 10, tugged at her sleeve. Mom, watch. He demonstrated a simple yielding exercise flowing around imaginary force. See, I'm not giving up, I'm giving way. There's a difference. The mother watched her son move with a grace she'd never seen in him before, and something in her face softened. I still don't like it, she said, but the heat had gone out of her voice. You don't have to like it, Mason replied. Just watch your son. See if he's weaker or stronger in a month. See if he's more afraid or less. Then decide. She left without another word, but her son waved goodbye, a secret smile on his face. That evening, Mason and Lila celebrated with ice cream from the shop on the corner, a rare treat that tasted like victory. We did it, Lila said, chocolate sauce on her chin. You did it. I just stood there. You stood there in exactly the right way. That's what you taught me. Sometimes the most important thing is how you hold space. They walked home slowly, savoring the cooling evening and the sense of something significant shifting. But as they approached their building, Mason saw someone waiting who made his blood run cold. It was a man he hadn't seen in 5 years, someone from the life he'd left behind. Colonel Rick Santos, his former commanding officer, the man who'd led their unit through the worst of Afghanistan. Mason, Santos said simply. Rick. Lila looked between them, sensing the sudden tension. Dad. Go inside, sweetheart. I'll be up in a minute. She went, but not without a worried backward glance. Santos waited until she was gone before speaking. We need to talk. I'm out, Rick. Have been for 5 years. I know, but something's come up, something from Kandahar. The name hit Mason like a physical blow. Kandahar, where everything had gone wrong, where the lines between necessary and unforgivable had blurred beyond recognition. That's buried. Not anymore. There's going to be an investigation, congressional oversight. They're reopening the whole thing. Mason felt the past rushing toward him like a tide he'd thought had permanently receded. Why now? Because someone talked, someone who was there. They're saying things, Mason. Things about what we did, what you did, what we were ordered to do. Orders that were never written down. You know how this works. Mason did know. The operations that existed in the spaces between official and necessary. The actions that saved lives by taking others, the choices that had seemed clear in the moment, but grew murkier with distance. What do you want from me? To remember that we were brothers, that we protected each other then, and we protect each other now. My daughter doesn't need to know anything. Neither does anyone else. We keep our stories straight, and this passes like every other investigation. Santos left without waiting for an answer, disappearing into the city night like the ghost he'd always been good at becoming. Mason stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of 2 worlds colliding, the one he'd built from careful invisibility and gentle teaching, and the one he'd fled from, full of necessary violence and impossible choices. When he finally went upstairs, Lila was waiting in the living room. Who was that man? Someone from before. From the army. Yes. Is he going to cause problems? Mason sat beside his daughter, this wise child who'd somehow become his teacher. I don't know. Maybe. But we'll handle it. Like we handle everything. Like water. Mason agreed, though he wondered if water could wash away bloodstains that had set for years. That night, after Lila was asleep, Mason stood at his window and watched the city pulse with its endless life. Somewhere out there, Jake Morrison was probably not sleeping fighting his own ghosts. Cole was teaching a late-night class showing people how to find strength in softness. Juliet was planning the expansion of something that had started as a rooftop demonstration and become a movement. Grace Lynn was writing another article trying to capture in words what could only be understood through experience. And somewhere records were being pulled, testimonies, reviewed questions, asked about actions taken in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map. Mason had thought he could disappear, become invisible, let the past sink into obscurity. But the past he was learning was like water too. It found every crack, seeped through every barrier, and eventually rose to the surface. The question now was whether the man he'd become could face what the man he'd been had done. Whether the teacher of peace could reconcile with the warrior of necessity. Whether water could hold two different truths without breaking apart. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The truth sets everyone free, even when it hurts. A friend from Kandahar. Mason deleted the message, but the words remained etched in memory, like everything else from that time and place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the program to oversee his daughter, to protect a past, to confront. But tonight, in the space between who he'd been and who he was becoming, Mason stood like water at rest. Calm on the surface depths, unknown, ready to flow in whatever direction life demanded. The city hummed its endless song around him, and he listened, learning its rhythm, finding his place in its current. He'd been invisible then. Visible, and now something in between, like water catching light, sometimes clear, sometimes reflective, always essentially itself. Whatever came next, he would meet it the way he'd learned to meet everything, with presence, with breath, and with the understanding that true strength was not in fighting the current, but in becoming it, flowing around obstacles, finding the path of least resistance that was somehow also the path of greatest power.